My name is Emma, and I've been a park ranger at Timber Creek National Park for nearly 12 years. Timber Creek is a beautiful, sprawling park filled with dense forests, winding rivers, and stunning vistas. It's a place of tranquility and natural beauty, but like many wild places, it has its share of dark secrets. One of the oldest legends in Timber Creek is that of the ghost of Timber Creek, a spectral figure said to haunt the woods near the old logging camp. The story goes back over a century, to when logging was a booming industry in the area. The camp was abandoned after a tragic accident that claimed the lives of several loggers. And since then, locals have reported seeing ghostly apparitions and hearing strange noises in the area. I had always been skeptical of the ghost stories, attributing them to overactive imaginations and the eerie atmosphere of the forest. But one summer, my skepticism was put to the test. It was late July, and the park was bustling with visitors. Families were camping, hikers were exploring the trails, and the river was filled with people enjoying the cool water. One evening, I received a call about a group of campers who had gone missing near the old logging camp. They were supposed to check in with the ranger station, but no one had heard from them since the previous night. I grabbed my gear and set out for the logging camp. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest, and the air was filled with the sounds of chirping crickets and rustling leaves. As I approached the camp, the atmosphere grew heavier, and an inexplicable sense of foreboding settled over me. The logging camp was a collection of dilapidated cabins, their wooden walls weathered and covered in moss. The place had an eerie, abandoned feel, and it was easy to see why people believed it was haunted. I called out for the campers, but there was no response. I started to search the area, my flashlight cutting through the gathering darkness. The cabins were empty, their interiors filled with cobwebs and decaying furniture. I was about to head back and call for backup when I heard a faint, ghostly wail, carried on the wind. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The wail grew louder, more distinct, and it seemed to be coming from deeper in the forest. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, my flashlight flickering as I moved. The wailing led me to a small clearing, where I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a woman, her long hair flowing in the breeze, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She looked at me, her expression one of sorrow and despair. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed to the edge of the clearing. I turned to look, and there, half buried in the underbrush, was a small, weathered grave marker. The name on the marker was barely legible, but I could make out the words Sarah McKinley and the date 1893. When I turned back, the ghostly figure was gone. The wailing had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. I approached the grave marker, my mind racing. Sarah McKinley was one of the loggers who had died in the accident. According to the legend, she had been searching for her lost child when she met her tragic end. As I stood there, piecing together the story, heard voices calling out to me. The missing campers emerged from the forest, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. "We saw her too," one of them, a young man named Alex, said. "The ghost. She led us to this spot. We were lost and scared, and then she appeared. She pointed the way back." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The camper's story mirrored my own experience. We gathered around the grave marker, paying our respects to the long-departed Sarah McKinley. As we did, the oppressive feeling in the air seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of peace. We made our way back to the ranger station, where the campers recounted their experience to the other rangers. Their story was met with skepticism, but I knew the truth. The ghost of Timber Creek wasn't a malevolent spirit, but a guardian, watching over those who wandered too far into the forest. In the days that followed, I did some research into Sarah McKinley's life and death. She had been a logger, yes, but she was also a mother who had lost her child in the wilderness. Her spirit, unable to find peace, continued to search for her child, guiding lost souls back to safety. I often think about that night and the ghostly figure who led us back from the brink. Timber Creek National Park is a place of beauty and wonder, but it is also a place where the past lingers, where the spirits of those who came before us still roam. As a park ranger, I've learned to respect the stories and legends, knowing that sometimes they hold a kernel of truth. And sometimes, the forest's guardians are not what we expect them to be. My name is Hannah, and I've been a park ranger at Whistling Woods for the past decade. Whistling Woods is a breathtaking park, known for its dense forests, crystal clear lakes, and the strange, melodic whistling sounds that often echo through the trees. These sounds have given rise to countless legends and stories, but none as chilling as the one I experienced a few years ago. It was late autumn, and the park was preparing for the quieter winter months. Most of the tourists had left, and only a few die-hard campers and hikers remained. I was on night patrol, ensuring that the park's few remaining visitors were safe, and that the trails were clear. One evening, I received a call from a couple who had set up camp near the Whispering Pines, a particularly remote part of the park. They reported hearing strange whistling sounds that seemed to be getting closer and closer. Concerned, I grabbed my gear and set off toward their campsite. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched underfoot as I made my way through the forest. The whistling sounds, faint at first, began to grow louder and more distinct. It was an eerie, haunting melody, unlike anything I had heard before. It seemed to come from all directions, making it difficult to pinpoint its source. When I arrived at the campsite, the couple, Mark and Lisa, were visibly shaken. They described the sounds as not just eerie, but almost hypnotic, drawing them toward the deeper part of the woods. "We thought it was just the wind at first," Mark said, his voice trembling. "But then it started to sound like music, like someone was playing a flute. We tried to ignore it," Lisa added, "but it just kept getting louder. We felt like we had to follow it." I assured them that I would investigate and told them to stay close to their campsite. I ventured deeper into the forest, following the haunting melody. The further I went, the louder the whistling became, and the more disoriented I felt. It was as if the sound was pulling me, guiding me through the trees. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon an old, forgotten trail that I had never seen before. The trees around me seemed ancient, their twisted branches creating an almost impenetrable canopy. The whistling was deafening now, and I felt a growing sense of unease. I pushed forward, my flashlight flickering as if struggling to stay lit. The trail led me to a small clearing, and in the center stood a stone circle, weathered by time and covered in moss. The whistling seemed to emanate from within the circle, an unearthly sound that sent chills down my spine. As I approached the circle, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows. It was an old man, dressed in tattered clothes, his eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. He held a flute carved from bone, and as he played, the whistling filled the air. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the haunting melody. The old man stopped playing and looked at me, his eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to span centuries. "I am the guardian of Whistling Woods," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "I have been here for longer than I can remember, bound to this place by a curse." "A curse?" I echoed, taking a cautious step forward. He nodded. "Many years ago, I was a musician, a wanderer, who played my flute to bring joy to those who heard it. But one night, I played a tune that angered the spirits of the forest. They cursed me, binding me to this place, forever, to play the haunting melody you hear. Is there any way to break the curse?" I asked, feeling a strange mix of fear and pity. "There is," he replied, "but it requires a great sacrifice. Someone must willingly take my place, allowing me to finally rest." I felt a shiver run down my spine. The thought of being bound to this forest, to play that haunting melody for eternity, was terrifying. I don't know if I can do that," I stammered. The old man sighed, his expression one of resignation. "I understand," Few have the courage to make such a sacrifice. But remember, the forest is always listening. The spirits are always watching. As he spoke, the whistling began to fade, and the old man slowly vanished into the shadows. The stone circle remained, a silent reminder of the curse that bound him. I made my way back to the campsite, the haunting melody still echoing in my mind. Mark and Lisa were relieved to see me, but I could tell they sensed the change in my demeanor. "What happened out there?" Mark asked. "It's a long story," I replied, glancing back toward the forest. "But I think it's best if we leave this place tonight." We packed up their campsite and made our way back to the main trail. The whistling had stopped, replaced by the familiar sounds of the forest. But I knew that the legend of Whistling Woods was more than just a story. It was a warning, a reminder of the ancient forces that still linger in the wild places of the world. As a park ranger, I've encountered many strange and unsettling things. But the haunting melody of Whistling Woods will stay with me forever. A chilling reminder of the sacrifices that some must make to keep the forest's secrets hidden. My name is Lucas, and I have been a park ranger at Evergreen National Park for the past 8 years. This park is known for its lush forests, cascading waterfalls, and the legendary Forgotten Path, a trail that many believe doesn't exist. Over the years, I had heard numerous stories about this mythical path, but I always dismissed them as mere folklore. That changed during one fateful summer when I encountered something that would forever alter my perception of the park. It was a warm August afternoon, and the park was alive with the sounds of nature and the laughter of visitors. I was on my routine patrol, ensuring that everything was in order. As I walked along one of the less frequented trails, I spotted an old man sitting on a fallen log. He looked to be in his late 60s, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. "Afternoon," I greeted him. "Everingthalerite." The old man nodded, but there was a distant look in his eyes. "Just reminiscing about old times," he said. "I used to come here with my wife. This place holds many memories." We chatted for a while, and he shared stories of his adventures in the park. As the conversation progressed, he mentioned something that piqued my curiosity. "Have you ever heard of the Forgotten Path?" he asked. I chuckled. "Yeah, I've heard the stories. But it's just a myth, right? A legend to spook the tourists." The old man's expression turned serious. "It's no myth. The path is real, and it leads to a place where time stands still." I was intrigued but skeptical. "And have you seen it?" He nodded slowly. "Once, a long time ago. It's not easy to find, and even harder to leave." He went on to explain that the path only appears to those who are truly lost, either physically or spiritually. It's a place where people can confront their deepest fears and desires. Despite my skepticism, his words resonated with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was some truth to his story. After our conversation, I continued my patrol, but the old man's words lingered in my mind. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the forest, I decided to take a detour and explore a rarely used trail. It was a path I had walked many times before, but this time, something felt different. The forest grew denser, and the familiar sounds of birds and rustling leaves faded away, replaced by an eerie silence. I walked for what felt like hours, the trees growing taller and more imposing with each step. Just as I was about to turn back, I saw a narrow, overgrown trail veering off to the left. It was barely noticeable, almost as if it was hiding from plain sight. My heart raced as I approached the trail. Could this be the Forgotten Path? Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the path, the foliage closing in around me. The further I walked, the more surreal my surroundings became. The trees seemed to twist and bend, their branches forming strange, almost human-like shapes. After what felt like an eternity, I emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its wooden walls covered in moss and ivy. The air was thick with the sense of foreboding, and I felt a chill run down my spine. As I approached the cabin, I noticed a faint light flickering inside. Pushing open the creaky door, I stepped into a dimly lit room. The interior was sparse, with only a few pieces of old furniture and a fireplace that hadn't seen a fire in years. Suddenly, I heard a soft voice behind me, "Lucas." I spun around, my flashlight illuminating the figure of a young woman. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her long hair cascading over her shoulders. Her eyes were sad but kind. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "My name is Evelyn," she replied. "I've been waiting for someone like you." "Waiting for me? Why?" "To help me find peace," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trapped here for so long, unable to move on." Evelyn explained that she had once lived in the cabin with her family. One night, a terrible storm swept through the forest, and a landslide buried the cabin. She had died in the disaster, but her spirit remained, bound to the place where she had lost her life. "Please," she pleaded, "help me find my way back to my family." I felt a surge of compassion for Evelyn and vowed to help her. We left the cabin and made our way back along the forgotten path. As we walked, Evelyn shared more about her life and the love she had for her family. Her story was heartbreaking, and I could feel her pain as if it were my own. Finally, we reached the edge of the forest, where the path began to fade. Evelyn stopped and turned to me, a look of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Lucas," she said. "You've given me the strength to move on." With that, she began to fade, her spirit dissolving into the air. I watched as she disappeared, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. When I returned to the park, the old man was gone, leaving no trace behind. I never saw him again, but I often think of his words and the journey he set me on. The forgotten path is real, and it leads not just through the forest, but through the deepest parts of our souls. As a park ranger, I've learned that the wilderness holds many secrets, and not all of them can be explained. Some paths are meant to be walked, not to be understood. And sometimes, the journey itself is the answer we seek. My name is Ethan, and for the past 12 years, I've been a park ranger at Whispering Pines National Forest. This place is a haven for hikers, campers, and nature lovers. With its towering pine trees, serene lakes, and endless trails, it's a slice of paradise. However, there are parts of the forest that even seasoned rangers like myself tend to avoid. There's a particular area known as the Silent Grove, a dense, uncharted section of the forest with an eerie reputation. One summer evening received a call about a missing hiker named Sarah. She had ventured off trail and hadn't been heard from in over 24 hours. I gathered my gear and set out immediately, determined to find her before nightfall. The search led me deeper into the forest than I had ever been. The trees grew thicker, and the usual sounds of wildlife seemed to fade away, replaced by an unsettling silence. It wasn't long before I realized I had wandered into the Silent Grove. As I pushed through the dense underbrush, I caught sight of something glimmering in the distance. It was a small, weathered cabin, almost hidden by the overgrown foliage. This cabin wasn't on any of our maps, and I had never heard of it before. I approached cautiously, hoping that Sarah might have taken refuge inside. The cabin's door creaked open, revealing a dark, dusty interior. I called out Sarah's name, but there was no response. The place appeared abandoned, with cobwebs hanging from the corners and an overwhelming sense of neglect. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a piece of fabric caught on a broken window bright blue, like the jacket Sarah had been wearing. My heart raced as I stepped outside to search the surrounding area. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. I spotted a narrow path leading away from the cabin and decided to follow it. The path was overgrown, as if it hadn't been used in years, but something compelled me to keep going. The further I walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The silence was unnerving, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, a whisper carried by the wind. I stopped and listened, but it was gone. As I continued, The whispering returned, growing louder and more insistent. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. The path led me to a clearing, and there, standing in the center, was a tall, gaunt figure. He was dressed in old, tattered ranger gear, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. "I'm looking for a missing hiker. Have you seen a yoni?" The figure remained silent, but he slowly lifted his head, revealing hollow, sunken eyes. A chill ran down my spine as I realized he wasn't human, at least, not anymore. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said in a raspy voice. "This place is not for the living." I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run. "Who are you?" "I am the Watcher," he replied. "Bound to this forest, cursed to protect it from those who would disturb its peace." "Please," I said, trying to stay calm. "I just want to find Sarah and get out of here." The Watcher's eyes seemed to soften for a moment. "The girl is safe, but you must leave now. The forest does not take kindly to intruders." Before I could respond, the whispering grew louder, surrounding me. Shadows seemed to move among the trees, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I turned and ran back the way I had come, the whispers chasing me through the forest. When I finally reached the cabin, I found Sarah huddled inside, her eyes wide with fear. She was unhurt, but clearly shaken. We left the silent grove as quickly as we could, the oppressive silence lifting as we moved further away. Back at the ranger station, I filed my report, leaving out the supernatural elements. Who would believe me anyway? Sarah confirmed that she had been lost and found the cabin, but she didn't mention seeing the Watcher. Over the years, I've learned that Whispering Pines holds many secrets, and the Silent Grove is just one of them. The forest is alive in ways we can't fully understand, and sometimes, it needs Somiani or Somathing to watch over it. I still patrol the park, always mindful of the boundaries we shouldn't cross. The Watcher of Whispering Pines remains a mystery, but his warning is clear: some places are meant to be left undisturbed. And not all who wander are lost, but some who wander find more than they bargained for. My name is Alex, and I've been a forest ranger at Timber Ridge National Forest for the past 15 years. The forest is a vast expanse of towering trees, winding trails, and hidden creeks. It's a place of breathtaking beauty and deep, ancient secrets. One of the most persistent legends in Timber Ridge is that of the ghost light, a mysterious, floating orb of light that appears in the forest at night, leading lost hikers to safety, or deeper into the woods, depending on who tells the story. I've always been skeptical of such tales, attributing them to overactive imaginations and the tricks of the forest at night. But an experience I had last autumn changed my perspective forever. It started with a call about a missing family. The Oliversparents, Sarah and Tom, and their 2 children, Emma and Jack, had gone on a day hike, but hadn't returned by dusk. With nightfall approaching, I knew time was of the essence. I gathered my gear and headed out, following the trail they had intended to hike. The forest was dense and dark, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. As I walked, the sounds of the forest enveloped me, rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The deeper I went, the quieter it became, until all I could hear was my own breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. After an hour of searching, I found a small, abandoned campsite. The fire pit was cold, and there were no signs of the family. I called out their names, my voice echoing through the trees, but there was no response. I decided to press on, my flashlight cutting through the encroaching darkness. Then I saw a faint, flickering light in the distance. It hovered just above the ground, bobbing gently, as if carried by an invisible hand. I thought it might be the family's campfire, so I headed toward it, my heart pounding with hope and apprehension. As I approached, the light grew brighter, illuminating a small clearing. But when I stepped into the clearing, realized the light wasn't a campfire. It was a single, floating orb of light, about the size of a basketball, glowing with an ethereal, bluish hue. It hovered a few feet off the ground, casting a soft glow on the surrounding trees. I stood frozen, unsure of what to make of it. The stories of the ghost light flashed through my mind, and for the first time, I wondered if they were true. The light seemed to pulse gently, as if beckoning me to follow. Hesitantly, I took a step forward, then another, until I was following the light deeper into the forest. The light led me through a maze of trees and overgrown trails, always staying just a few feet ahead. As we moved, I felt a strange sense of calm, as if the light was guiding me with a purpose. After what felt like hours, we emerged into another clearing. And there they were, with Oliver family, huddled together and shivering with cold and fear. They looked up as I approached, their faces lighting up with relief. "Thank God you found us," Sarah exclaimed. "We got lost and couldn't find our way back." I quickly assessed them for injuries, finding only minor scrapes and bruises. They were exhausted and scared, but otherwise unharmed. As I led them back toward the main trail, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see the light still hovering there. But it was gone, vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. Back at the ranger station, the Olivers recounted their experience. They spoke of hearing strange noises and seeing fleeting shadows in the trees, but they hadn't seen the ghost light. They were just grateful to be safe. I couldn't shake the feeling that the light had been watching over them, guiding me to their location. The encounter left me with more questions than answers, but it also gave me a newfound respect for the legends of Timber Ridge. In the days that followed, I shared my experience with my fellow rangers. Some were skeptical, while others believed I had encountered the ghost light. Regardless of their opinions, I knew what I had seen, and I was grateful for its guidance. Over the years, I continued my work in the forest, always keeping an eye out for the ghost light. I heard more stories from hikers and campers who claimed to have seen it. And each tale reinforced my belief that there was something otherworldly in Timber Ridge. One evening, I decided to return to the clearing where I had first encountered the light. As I stood there, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the forest, I spoke aloud, thanking the ghost light for its help. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I thought I saw a faint glow in the distance. Timber Ridge remains a place of wonder and mystery, its secrets guarded by the ghost light. As a ranger, I continue to protect and respect the forest, knowing that there are forces beyond my understanding watching over it. The light is a reminder of the magic that exists in the world, a silent guardian that ensures the safety of those who wander into its domain. And so, the legend of the ghost light lives on, a beacon of hope and mystery in the heart of Timber Ridge. My name is Derek, and I have served as a forest ranger in Cedar Grove National Forest for nearly 20 years. Cedar Grove is a sprawling forest, known for its ancient cedar trees, cascading waterfalls, and miles of hiking trails. It's a place where nature thrives and whispers its secrets to those who listen closely. Among these secrets is the chilling tale of the phantom whispersa phenomenon that has haunted this forest for as long as anyone can remember. The phantom whispers are said to be the voices of lost souls, echoing through the trees, calling out to the living. Some believe they are the spirits of those who perished in the forest, while others think they are echoes of tragedies long past. Over the years, many hikers and campers have reported hearing disembodied voices, but no one had ever been able to explain them. I had always been skeptical, attributing the whispers to the wind and the natural sounds of the forest until one fateful night changed everything. It was early spring when I received a call about a missing hiker named Daniel. He had set out on a solo trek through one of the more remote trails and had not returned as scheduled. With the weather turning cold and a storm on the horizon, I knew we had to find him quickly. I gathered my gear and set out, accompanied by my colleague, Jane. The trail Daniel had taken was rugged and overgrown, winding through dense forest and steep hills. As we hiked, the wind began to pick up, rustling the leaves and creating an eerie symphony. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows and plunging the forest into twilight. We had been searching for hours with no sign of Daniel, when we heard a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It seemed to come from all around us, carried on the wind. Jane and I exchanged uneasy glances, but we pressed on, calling out Daniel's name. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, as if guiding us deeper into the forest. "Do you hear that?" Jane asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. The voices were unintelligible, but they had an urgent, almost pleading tone. We followed the sound, our flashlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. We found ourselves in a small clearing, surrounded by ancient cedar trees. In the center of the clearing was a large, moss-covered boulder. On the ground near the boulder lay a tattered backpack, and beside it, a hiker's journal. I picked it up and flipped through the pages, recognizing Daniel's handwriting. The last entry was chilling. "I keep hearing voices. They seem to be coming from the trees, calling my name. I don't know if it's the wind or something else, but I feel like I'm being watched." As I read, Jane called out to me, "Derek, over here." I turned to see her standing near a large, gnarled tree, her flashlight focused on a figure slumped at its base. It was Daniel. He was unconscious but breathing. We quickly checked for injuries and found none, just extreme exhaustion and cold. As we prepared to carry him back, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. I felt a presence, as if unseen eyes were watching us. Jane and I worked quickly, determined to get Daniel to safety before the storm hit. The journey back was arduous, the wind howling through the trees and the whispers following us every step of the way. At times, it felt like the forest itself was alive, urging us onward. We finally reached the ranger station just as the storm broke, rain pouring down in torrents. Daniel regained consciousness, disoriented but otherwise unharmed. He recounted hearing the whispers, feeling as though they were leading him deeper into the forest. He had been too afraid to move, believing he was being watched by unseen entities. Back at the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that something otherworldly had been at play. The whispers, the eerie presence, all pointed to the legend of the phantom whispers. I shared our experience with the other rangers, and we all agreed to respect the mysterious forces at work in Cedar Grove. In the following weeks, I delved into the history of the forest, uncovering stories of lost hikers and tragic accidents. Many of these incidents had occurred near the same clearing where we found Daniel. It seemed that the phantom whispers were more than just a legend. They were a part of Cedar Grove's history, a reminder of the lives lost in its depths. As a ranger, I continue to protect and preserve the forest, always mindful of the whispers that haunt its shadows. I warn hikers to stay on marked trails and never venture into the forest alone, respecting the unseen forces that dwell within. The phantom whispers remain an enigma, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that nature holds. Cedar Grove is a place of beauty and wonder, but it is also a place of secrets and spirits. The whispers are a testament to the forest's enduring legacy, a haunting melody that echoes through the ages. And as long as I am here, I will honor and respect the phantom whispers, knowing that they are a part of the soul of Cedar Grove. My name is Maria, and I work as a forest ranger at Blackwood National Park. The park is a vast expanse of wilderness, teeming with diverse flora and fauna, and is crisscrossed with trails that attract hikers from all over the country. However, amidst the beauty lies a chilling history that many locals and rangers whisper about the haunting of Blackwood Cabin. Blackwood Cabin is an old, abandoned structure deep within the forest, accessible only by a narrow, overgrown trail. The cabin was built in the late 1800s by a trapper named Elias Blackwood, who mysteriously disappeared one winter. Since then, hikers and campers who ventured near the cabin reported Strange occurrence, whistling voices, flickering lights, and an overwhelming sense of dread. These tales were often dismissed as mere campfire stories, until one summer when I experienced the haunting firsthand. It was a particularly hot July afternoon when I received a distress call from a group of hikers who had lost their way near Blackwood Cabin. The hikers, a group of 4 friends, Shake, Lisa, Kevin, and Rachel, had ventured off the main trail to explore and had not been heard from for several hours. Concerned for their safety, I grabbed my gear and set off to find them. The trail to Blackwood Cabin was as treacherous as ever, overgrown with thick underbrush and brambles. As I hiked, the air grew heavy, and an eerie silence settled over the forest. The usual sounds of wildlife were conspicuously absent, adding to the sense of unease that gnawed at me. After about an hour, I reached the clearing where the cabin stood. The structure was in disrepair, its wooden walls weathered and covered in moss. The roof sagged, and the windows were dark and empty. I called out the hikers' names, my voice echoing through the stillness, but there was no response. As I approached the cabin, I noticed faint footprints in the dirt, leading toward the door. Summoning my courage, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit by the fading light of the day, and the air was thick with dust. The furniture was old and covered in cobwebs, and an old, rusted wood stove sat in one corner. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, like the rustling of leaves, but distinctly human. "Help us," it seemed to say. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed the sound to a back room. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I was met with a sight that sent shivers down my spine. There, huddled in the corner, were the 4 missing hikers. They looked terrified, their faces pale, and their eyes wide with fear. Jake, the oldest of the group, managed to speak first. "We heard the whispers," he said, his voice trembling. "They led us here, and then the door slammed shut. We couldn't get out." I helped them to their feet and reassured them that we were leaving. As we made our way back through the cabin, the whispering grew louder, echoing through the dilapidated walls. "Leave, now," the voices seemed to urge. We didn't need any further encouragement. We hurried out of the cabin and back onto the trail. The oppressive atmosphere lifted as we put distance between us and the cursed structure. Once we were safely back on the main trail, the hikers recounted their ordeal. They had heard the stories of Blackwood Cabin and decided to see it for themselves. As they approached, they heard faint whispers that seemed to be calling their names. Intrigued, they followed the sounds into the cabin, but once inside, the whispers grew menacing, and the door slammed shut, trapping them. They felt an overwhelming presence, as if unseen eyes were watching them from the shadows. I reported the incident to my superiors, and we decided to close off the trail leading to Blackwood Cabin, marking it as off-limits to hikers. The forest has many secrets, and some are best left undisturbed. In the following weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin was still watching, waiting. I researched more about Elias Blackwood and discovered that he had been a solitary man, known for his reclusive nature. Some believed he had dabbled in dark rituals, hoping to communicate with spirits. His disappearance only added to the mystery, with some locals claiming he had summoned something that couldn't be banished. One evening, decided to return to the cabin alone, determined to find answers. Armed with a flashlight and a recording device, I made my way back to the clearing. The cabin loomed ominously in the twilight, its shadow stretching like a clawed hand across the ground. As I stepped inside, the whispers began again, soft at first, then growing louder. "Why have you come?" they seemed to ask. I set up my recording device and called out, "Elias Blackwood, if you're here, show yourself." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the temperature dropped, and a cold breeze swept through the room. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a vortex. I felt a pressure on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the recording device crackled to life, and a voice clearer than the whisper spoke. "Leave this place. You are not welcome." The flashlight went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for the door, the whispers, now a cacophony of voices, urging me to leave. I burst out of the cabin, gasping for air. The oppressive atmosphere lifted immediately, and I stumbled back to the main trail. The recording device had captured the voice, a chilling reminder of the presence that still haunted Blackwood Cabin. I played the recording for my colleagues, and we agreed to keep the trail closed indefinitely. Blackwood Cabin was more than just an abandoned structure. It was a portal to something dark and malevolent. To this day, the cabin remains off limits, a silent sentinel in the heart of the forest. The whispers continue to echo through the trees, a reminder of the unseen forces that dwell within Blackwood National Park. As a ranger, I continue to protect the forest and its visitors, always mindful of the secrets it holds. The haunting of Blackwood Cabin is a tale that will be passed down through generations. A chilling reminder that some places are best left undisturbed. And I, for one, will never forget the night I encountered the whispers of the damned. My name is Ethan, and I am a forest ranger stationed at the Granite Peak National Forest. This forest is vast, with towering pines, crystal-clear lakes, and a network of trails that stretch for miles. But what sets Granite Peak apart from other forests is Fire Watchtower 13, a lonely outpost perched atop a remote hill, infamous for its ghostly legends. Fire Watchtower 13 was built in the 1940s to monitor wildfires. Over the years, rangers stationed there reported strange occurrences, noises, disembodied voices, and sudden drops in temperature. The tower was eventually decommissioned, and the stories of its hauntings became local folklore. I had always been intrigued by the stories, but remained skeptical. That changed when I was assigned to patrol the area around Tower 13 during a particularly dry summer. Wildfires were a constant threat, and my job was to ensure that any potential fires were quickly spotted and reported. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, received a call from a fellow ranger, Mark, who was patrolling near the base of the hill. He sounded frantic, saying he had seen lights flickering in the tower and heard voices calling for help. Knowing the tower was abandoned, I decided to investigate. The trail to Tower 13 was overgrown and rarely used, winding through dense forest and steep inclines. As I hiked, the air grew cooler, and an unsettling silence enveloped me. I reached the base of the tower just as darkness fell, and I could see faint lights flickering in the windows. I climbed the wooden steps, each creak echoing in the stillness. When I reached the top, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was dusty and neglected, with old furniture covered in cobwebs. The only light came from my flashlight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, I heard Ida's soft, mournful whisper, "Help us." The voice was faint but unmistakable. My heart pounded as I followed the sound to the observation deck. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath in the dim light. As I scanned the room, I noticed an old logbook on a table. The pages were yellowed with age, and the last entry was dated 1978. It detailed the final days of a ranger named Henry, who had been stationed at the tower. His entry spoke of hearing voices and seeing figures in the forest. The last line sent chills down my spine. "They're coming for me. I can hear them. God help me." As I read, the whispers grew louder, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see a faint, ghostly figure, a man dressed in a ranger uniform from the 1970s. His eyes were filled with fear, and his mouth moved as if speaking, but no sound came out. He pointed to the window, and I looked out to see more figures emerging from the forest, their forms ethereal and translucent. Panic set in as the temperature dropped further, and the whispers became a cacophony of voices, all pleading for help. The ghostly ranger reached out to me, his eyes wide with desperation. I bolted for the door, racing down the stairs and into the forest. The whispers followed me, echoing through the trees. I didn't stop until I reached Mark, who was waiting at the base of the hill. I told him what I had seen, and we both agreed to report it to our supervisor. In the following days, we learned more about Henry and the other rangers who had reported strange occurrences at Tower 13. Many had experienced similar hauntings, and some believed the spirits were those of rangers who had died in the line of duty, their souls unable to rest. The Forest Service decided to officially close off the area around Tower 13, marking it as off-limits to the public and rangers alike. The tower stands as a silent sentinel, a reminder of the eerie history of Granite Peak. Despite my skepticism, my experience at Fire Watch Tower 13 left me a believer in the supernatural. The voices, the ghostly figuretti were too real to ignore. I continue my duties as a ranger, but I always keep a respectful distance from Tower 13, honoring the spirits that still linger there. Granite Peak National Forest is a place of beauty and mystery, where the past and present intertwine. The ghosts of Fire Watch Tower 13 are a part of that legacy. Their whispers a haunting reminder of the unseen forces that dwell within the forest. And as long as I am a ranger, I will never forget the night I encountered the restless spirits of Tower 13. My name is Leela, and I have been a forest ranger at Silverwood Forest for over a decade. Silverwood is a beautiful, dense forest known for its ancient trees and diverse wildlife. But beyond its natural beauty lies a dark secret, a curse that has haunted the forest for centuries. The legend of Silverwood Forest dates back to the early settlers, who believed that the forest was sacred, inhabited by spirits both benevolent and malevolent. According to the tale, a group of settlers angered the spirits by desecrating a sacred grove, leading to a curse that doomed anyone who ventured too deep into the forest. Over the years, many hikers and explorers have disappeared without a trace, their fates sealed by the curse. I had always been skeptical of these stories, considering them mere folklore. But my perspective changed one fateful autumn when I was called to investigate a series of mysterious disappearances. 3 hikers, Sarah and Mick, had vanished while exploring a remote part of the forest. Their last known location was near the heart of Silverwood, a place locals avoided at all costs. Determined to find them, I set out alone, equipped with a map, a flashlight, and a walkie-talkie. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched under my boots as I made my way deeper into the forest. As I ventured further, the trees grew taller and the canopy thicker, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. After several hours of trekking, I reached a clearing known as the Silent Grove. The grove was eerily quiet, devoid of the usual sounds of wildlife. I felt an unsettling presence, as if unseen eyes were watching me. Ignoring the unease, I called out for the missing hikers, my voice echoing through the silence. "Tom, Sarah, Mike, can you hear me?" There was no response. I continued searching, my flashlight casting long shadows in the twilight. Suddenly, I heard a faint, melodic sound, a woman's voice humming an old tune. The sound was hypnotic, drawing me towards its source. I followed the melody, my heart pounding in my chest. The humming led me to a massive, ancient tree at the center of the grove. Its twisted branches reached out like gnarled fingers, and its trunk was covered in strange, intricate carvings. As I approached, the humming stopped, replaced by a chilling whisper. "Leave this place, or suffer the same fate." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I shivered, glancing around, but saw no one. Determined, I inspected the tree, searching for any clues. My fingers brushed against the carvings, and I felt a sudden jolt of pain, as if I had been shocked. "Help us!" The voice was different this time, more desperate. I turned to see 3 ghostly figures emerging from the shadows, Sarah and Mike. They looked pale and transparent, their faces etched with fear. "We're trapped," Sarah's ghostly form whispered. "The curse, it won't let us go." My mind raced as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. The legends were truth. Curse of Silverwood was real, and these hikers were its latest victims. What can I do? I asked, my voice trembling. Break the curse, Tom's ghost replied. Find the totem, buried beneath the tree. Destroy it, and we may be free. I nodded, determined to help. I grabbed a small shovel from my pack and began digging at the base of the ancient tree. The soil was surprisingly loose, and after a few minutes, I uncovered a small, intricately carved totem. It was made of wood and bone, with symbols that seemed to pulse with dark energy. As I held the totem, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Destroy it, now, Mike's ghost urged. With a deep breath, I raised the shovel and brought it down on the totem, smashing it into pieces. A blinding light erupted from the fragments, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. I covered my ears, dropping to my knees. When the light faded and the roar ceased, I looked up to see the ghostly figures of the hikers smiling at me, their forms growing fainter. Thank you, Sarah said softly. You've set us free. With that, they vanished, leaving me alone in the grove. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the sounds of the forest slowly returned. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. I returned to the ranger station and reported my findings, but I knew that most would dismiss my story as a fanciful tale. Despite my initial skepticism, I had witnessed the power of the curse and the spirits that lingered in Silverwood Forest. To this day, the silent grove remains a place of mystery and caution. I continue my duties as a ranger, but I am always mindful of the unseen forces that dwell within the forest. The curse of Silverwood may be broken, but its legend lives on, a reminder of the ancient spirits that once ruled the land. And as long as I am a ranger, I will never forget the night I freed the souls trapped by the curse of Silverwood Forest. My name is Jake, and I've been a forest ranger at Blackwood Pines for the past 5 years. The forest is known for its breathtaking scenery and extensive network of hiking trails, attracting nature enthusiasts from all over the country. But Blackwood Pines has a darker side. A trail that many believe is cursed, where hikers have been known to vanish without a trace. The locals call it the Vanishing Trail. According to legend, the trail was created by early settlers who encountered strange phenomena and ghostly apparitions. Over the years, numerous hikers have gone missing while exploring the trail, never to be seen again. Despite extensive search efforts, not a single clue has ever been found. I had always dismissed these stories as mere superstition until a series of disappearances in the summer of 2022. 3 experienced hikers, Srakel, Eric, and Logan, had set out to conquer the Vanishing Trail, but never returned. Their disappearance made headlines, and the pressure was on us to find out what happened. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I received a call from a fellow ranger, Laura, who was patrolling the area near the Vanishing Trail. She sounded shaken, saying she had seen strange lights and heard eerie sounds coming from the trail. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I grabbed my gear and headed out to meet her. As I approached the trailhead, the forest seemed to grow darker and more foreboding. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and the usual sounds of wildlife were conspicuously absent. Laura was waiting for me, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. I don't know what I saw, Jake, but it wasn't normal, she said, her voice trembling. We decided to investigate together, making our way down the trail. The path was narrow and overgrown, winding through dense thickets and towering pines. As we ventured deeper, a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring our surroundings. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath in the cool night air. Suddenly, we heard Ida's soft, melodic singing that seemed to come from all directions. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, drawing us further into the fog. We followed the sound, our flashlights cutting through the dense mist. The singing led us to a clearing where we found an old, abandoned campsite. The remnants of a fire pit and a few scattered belongings suggested that someone had been there recently. Among the items, I found a tattered map marked with the initials R. Rachel, Eric, and Logan. As I examined the map, Laura pointed towards the edge of the clearing. There, standing just beyond the reach of our flashlights, was a figure. It was a woman, her features obscured by the fog, dressed in old-fashioned clothing. She stared at us with hollow, vacant eyes before vanishing into the mist. "What the hell was that?" Laura whispered, gripping my arm. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing. "But we need to keep moving." We continued along the trail, the fog growing thicker and the singing louder. It felt as if we were walking in circles, the trail never seeming to end. The trees loomed over us like dark sentinels, their branches creaking in the wind. Then, without warning, the singing stopped and the fog lifted. We found ourselves in front of a massive, ancient tree with a hollow trunk. Carved into the bark were strange symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. As we approached, a sudden chill ran down my spine, and I felt a sense of impending doom. "Do you see that?" Laura asked, pointing to the base of the tree. I looked closer and saw what appeared to be a doorway carved into the trunk. The symbols seemed to pulse with energy, and I could hear faint whispers emanating from within. Against my better judgment, I reached out and touched the door. The moment my fingers made contact, a blinding light enveloped us. When the light faded, we were no longer in the forest. We stood in a vast, empty landscape, shrouded in mist. The air was cold and still, and the only sound was the distant, echoing song we had followed. "Where are we?" Laura asked, her voice echoing in the void. "I don't know," I replied, my mind racing. "But we need to find a way back." As we explored this strange place, we stumbled upon more ghostly figure-shikers. Rangers and settlers from different eras, all with the same hollow, vacant eyes. They seemed trapped, wandering aimlessly in the mist. Among them, we found Rachel, Eric, and Logan, their faces etched with fear and confusion. "We've been here for so long," Will said, her voice distant and hollow. "We followed the singing, just like you." "We need to break the curse," Eric added. "Find the source of the song and destroy it." Determined to free them, we followed the song to its sourcey towering monolith in the center of the misty landscape. The monolith was covered in the same glowing symbols, and at its base, we found a stone altar with a glowing crystal. "This is it," Logan said. "Destroy the crystal, and we can all go free." With a deep breath, I picked up a nearby rock and smashed the crystal. The moment it shattered, the symbols on the monolith faded, and the mist began to dissipate. The ghostly figures around us started to vanish, their forms dissolving into the air. My name is Olivia, and I used to work as a park ranger in a remote part of the Pacific Northwest. My job was to protect the natural beauty of the forest and ensure the safety of visitors. It was a peaceful life, surrounded by towering trees, pristine rivers, and the occasional wildlife sighting. But one autumn, I encountered something that defied explanation and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the forest. The area I patrolled was vast and mostly untouched by human hands. The dense forest was home to countless species of plants and animals, and it was easy to lose yourself in its beauty. However, there was one section of the forest that locals referred to as the Silent Woods. It was a place where the usual sounds of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling, are conspicuously absent. The silence was unsettling, and few dared to venture into that part of the forest. One crisp October morning, I received a call about a missing hiker who had last been seen near the Silent Woods. The hiker, a young man named Eric, had come to the park to enjoy a weekend of solitude and nature. His friends reported him missing when he failed to return as planned. Concerned for his safety, I set out to search for him, armed with my radio, flashlight, and a map of the area. As I approached the Silent Woods, a sense of unease settled over me. The usual sounds of the forest faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow even the sound of my footsteps. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled branches twisting together to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. I called out for Eric, my voice sounding strangely muted in the still air. There was no response, only the silence pressing in from all sides. I pressed on, my flashlight casting long shadows on the forest floor. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt like I was being watched. After hours of searching, I came across a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old, dilapidated cabin. It wasn't marked on any of the maps, and its presence was unnerving. The door was slightly ajar, and a cold breeze seemed to whisper through the cracks in the wood. Hesitant but determined, I approached the cabin and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was musty and stale, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. It was clear that no one had lived here for years. As I scanned the room with my flashlight, I noticed a journal lying on a table, its pages yellowed with age. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up the journal. The entries were dated decades ago, written by someone named Samuel. He described his life in the cabin, his love for the forest, and a growing fear of something he referred to as the creature. According to Samuel, the creature was a malevolent spirit that haunted the silent woods, taking on the form of a wolf to hunt its prey. As I read the final entry, my blood ran cold. Samuel wrote that he could hear the creature's howls outside the cabin, growing closer with each passing night. He feared that his time was running out, and that the creature would soon come for him. Just as I finished reading, a low growl echoed from outside the cabin. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned off my flashlight, plunging the cabin into darkness. I peered out through a crack in the wall, straining to see what was outside. In the dim light of the fading sun, I saw it a massive, wolf-like creature, with fur as black as midnight and eyes that glowed an eerie red. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its gaze fixed on the cabin. I held my breath, praying that it wouldn't come any closer. The creature let out a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the forest, then slowly turned and disappeared into the trees. I waited in the darkness, my heart racing, until I was sure it was gone. Gathering my courage, I decided to leave the cabin and head back to the ranger station. But as I stepped outside, I found Eric's backpack lying near the entrance, half buried in leaves. Fearing the worst, I grabbed the backpack and retraced my steps through the silent woods, constantly looking over my shoulder for any sign of the creature. When I finally emerged from the woods, the familiar sounds of the forest returned, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Back at the ranger station, I handed the backpack over to the search and rescue team. They eventually found Eric's body near the edge of the silent woods, his death attributed to an animal attack. The official report made no mention of the creature I had seen, but I knew the truth. The silent woods held a dark secret, one that defied logic and explanation. I left my job as a park ranger shortly after that incident, unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. The forest, once a place of peace and solace, had become a place of nightmares. As I read the final entry, my blood ran cold. Samuel wrote that he could hear the creature's howls outside the cabin, growing closer with each passing night. He feared that his time was running out, and that the creature would soon come for him. Just as I finished reading, a low growl echoed from outside the cabin. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned off my flashlight, plunging the cabin into darkness. I peered out through a crack in the wall, straining to see what was outside. In the dim light of the fading sun, I saw it a massive, wolf-like creature, with fur as black as midnight and eyes that glowed an eerie red. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its gaze fixed on the cabin. I held my breath, praying that it wouldn't come any closer. The creature let out a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the forest, then slowly turned and disappeared into the trees. I waited in the darkness, my heart racing, until I was sure it was gone. Gathering my courage, I decided to leave the cabin and head back to the ranger station. But as I stepped outside, I found Eric's backpack lying near the entrance, half buried in leaves. Fearing the worst, I grabbed the backpack and retraced my steps through the silent woods, constantly looking over my shoulder for any sign of the creature. When I finally emerged from the woods, the familiar sounds of the forest returned, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Back at the ranger station, I handed the backpack over to the search and rescue team. They eventually found Eric's body near the edge of the silent woods, his death attributed to an animal attack. The official report made no mention of the creature I had seen, but I knew the truth. The silent woods held a dark secret, one that defied logic and explanation. I left my job as a park ranger shortly after that incident, unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. The forest, once a place of peace and solace, had become a place of nightmares. My name is Olivia, and I used to work as a park ranger in a remote part of the Pacific Northwest. My job was to protect the natural beauty of the forest and ensure the safety of visitors. It was a peaceful life, surrounded by towering trees, pristine rivers, and the occasional wildlife sighting. But one autumn, I encountered something that defied explanation and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the forest. The area I patrolled was vast and mostly untouched by human hands. The dense forest was home to countless species of plants and animals, and it was easy to lose yourself in its beauty. However, there was one section of the forest that locals referred to as the Silent Woods. It was a place where the usual sounds of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling, are conspicuously absent. The silence was unsettling, and few dared to venture into that part of the forest. One crisp October morning, I received a call about a missing hiker who had last been seen near the Silent Woods. The hiker, a young man named Eric, had come to the park to enjoy a weekend of solitude and nature. His friends reported him missing when he failed to return as planned. Concerned for his safety, I set out to search for him, armed with my radio, flashlight, and a map of the area. As I approached the Silent Woods, a sense of unease settled over me. The usual sounds of the forest faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow even the sound of my footsteps. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled branches twisting together to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. I called out for Eric, my voice sounding strangely muted in the still air. There was no response, only the silence pressing in from all sides. I pressed on, my flashlight casting long shadows on the forest floor. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt like I was being watched. After hours of searching, I came across a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old, dilapidated cabin. It wasn't marked on any of the maps, and its presence was unnerving. The door was slightly ajar, and a cold breeze seemed to whisper through the cracks in the wood. Hesitant but determined, I approached the cabin and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was musty and stale, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. It was clear that no one had lived here for years. As I scanned the room with my flashlight, I noticed a journal lying on a table, its pages yellowed with age. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up the journal. The entries were dated decades ago, written by someone named Samuel. He described his life in the cabin, his love for the forest, and a growing fear of something he referred to as the creature. According to Samuel, the creature was a malevolent spirit that haunted the Silent Woods, taking on the form of a wolf to hunt its prey. My name is Jacob, and I used to be a wildlife photographer based in the rugged mountains of Montana. My passion for capturing the beauty of nature had taken me to some of the most remote and breathtaking locations. Little did I know that one such expedition would change my life forever, plunging me into a terrifying encounter with a creature straight out of legend. It all started when I received a tip from a fellow photographer about a secluded valley known for its abundant wildlife. The valley, nestled deep within the mountains, was said to be a haven for wolves, eagles, and even elusive mountain lions. Excited by the prospect of capturing rare and stunning photographs, I packed my gear and set off on what I thought would be another routine trip. The journey to the valley was arduous, involving hours of hiking through dense forests and steep, rocky terrain. As I approached the valley, I noticed a change in the atmosphere. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence settled over the landscape. The usual sounds of the forest chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves were conspicuously absent. Determined to reach my destination, I pressed on and eventually arrived at the valley just as the sun was beginning to set. The sight that greeted me was nothing short of breathtaking. The valley was a pristine expanse of meadows, dotted with wildflowers and crisscrossed by a sparkling river. In the distance, I could see a pack of wolves moving gracefully through the grass, their fur glowing in the golden light of the setting sun. I set up my camp near the edge of the valley, eager to start photographing the wildlife at dawn. As night fell, I lit a small campfire and settled into my tent, feeling a sense of contentment and anticipation. Little did I know that the tranquility of the valley would soon be shattered. It was sometime after midnight when I was jolted awake by a series of howls echoing through the valley. The howls were unlike anything I had ever heard, deep, guttural, and filled with an otherworldly menace. They seemed to come from all directions, growing louder and more insistent with each passing minute. Grabbing my flashlight and camera, I stepped out of my tent and scanned the darkness, trying to locate the source of the howls. The fire had died down to embers, casting a faint glow around my camp. The valley, which had seemed so inviting during the day, now felt like a trap. As I moved away from my camp, the howls grew closer, and I could feel a sense of dread creeping over me. My flashlight beam caught movement in the shadows, and I saw them glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness. The eyes were too high off the ground to belong to any wolf, and their eerie red glow sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly, one of the creatures stepped into the light, and I realized with horror that it was not a wolf at all. It stood on two legs, towering over me, its muscular body covered in thick, matted fur. Its face was a grotesque blend of human and wolf, with a long snout, sharp fangs, and eyes that burned with a malevolent intelligence. I froze, unable to move or even breathe. The creature let out a deafening howl, and I knew that I had to get out of there. I turned and ran back to my camp, my heart pounding in my chest. The howls followed me, growing louder and more frenzied. I grabbed my gear and bolted, not daring to look back. The darkness of the forest closed in around me as I sprinted through the trees, guided only by the faint light of my flashlight. The howls seemed to be right behind me, echoing through the night. Hours passed in a blur of terror and exhaustion. I stumbled and fell more times than I could count, my body battered and bruised. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. With a final burst of energy, I made my way to a clearing and collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. As the sun rose, the howls finally ceased, and the oppressive silence lifted. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, too exhausted and terrified to move. When I finally found the strength to get up, I realized that I had lost most of my gear in my frantic escape. All I had left was my camera, hanging by a strap around my neck. I made my way back to civilization, haunted by the memory of those glowing eyes and the terrible howls. I never spoke about what happened in the valley, fearing that no one would believe me. But the photographs I took that day, images of the valley bathed in golden light. The distant figures of the wolf remained as a reminder of that fateful night. My name is Sarah, and I was a forest ranger in the picturesque region of Moonlit Falls. Nestled in the heart of the Pacific Northwest, Moonlit Falls was known for its dense forests, cascading waterfalls, and vibrant wildlife. It was a paradise for nature lovers, and I had the privilege of working in this serene environment, ensuring the safety of both the forest and its visitors. Little did I know that one particular night would plunge me into a nightmare beyond imagination. The incident took place in late autumn, when the days grew shorter and the nights colder. The town was preparing for its annual Moonlit Festival, a celebration of the harvest and the beauty of the full moon. My responsibilities included patrolling the trails, assisting hikers, and monitoring wildlife activity. As a ranger, I had heard countless tales of strange occurrences in the forest, disappearing hikers, eerie noises, and unexplained sightings, but I had always dismissed them as local folklore. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, received a call from the ranger station. A group of campers had reported hearing strange howling noises near their campsite, located deep within the forest. Concerned for their safety, I grabbed my flashlight, radio, and a map, and set off toward the campsite. The sky was clear, and the full moon cast an ethereal glow over the forest, creating long shadows that danced eerily in the light. The hike to the campsite was uneventful, and I found the campers huddled around a campfire, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. They described hearing a series of bone-chilling howls that seemed to circle their camp. Despite their unease, there was no immediate sign of danger. So I assured them that I would investigate the area and that they should stay close to the fire. Leaving the campsite, I ventured deeper into the forest, guided by the beams of my flashlight and the light of the full moon. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the usual chorus of nocturnal creatures eerily absent. As I walked, I felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a howl so loud and mournful that it seemed to shake the very trees. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The howl was followed by another, closer this time, and I knew I had to find the source. I moved quickly but cautiously, my senses on high alert. The howls led me to a clearing where the moonlight shone brightly, illuminating a scene that made my blood run cold. In the center of the clearing stood a massive figure, unlike anything I had ever seen. It was covered in thick, dark fur, standing on two powerful legs, with muscular arms hanging by its sides. Its face was a grotesque fusion of human and wolf, with a long snout, sharp fangs, and eyes that glowed with a menacing yellow light. For a moment, I was paralyzed by fear, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The creature let out another howl, this time directed at me, and I knew I had to run. I turned and bolted back toward the campsite, my mind racing. The howls pursued me, growing louder and more frantic as I crashed through the underbrush. When I reached the campsite, I found the campers packing up in a panic, having heard the howls getting closer. I urged them to stay calm and follow me back to the ranger station, hoping we could outrun whatever was stalking us. The journey back was a blur of terror and adrenaline, with the howls echoing through the trees, never far behind. We reached the ranger station just as the first light of dawn began to break. Exhausted and shaken, we barricaded ourselves inside, waiting for the howls to cease. As the sun rose, the forest slowly came back to life, and the howls finally stopped. The campers and I shared a sense of relief, but the memory of that night remained etched in our minds. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I began researching local legends and discovered stories of a werewolf curse that had plagued Moonlit Falls for centuries. According to the tales, the curse was linked to the full moon and the restless spirits of ancient hunters who had been transformed into werewolves as punishment for their sins. Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, I delved deeper into the history of Moonlit Falls, speaking with elders and historians. They recounted stories of disappearances, strange sightings, and unexplained deaths that coincided with the full moon. The more I learned, the more I realized that the creature I had encountered was not a figment of my imagination, but a real and terrifying part of the forest's dark history. Armed with this knowledge, I sought out ways to break the curse and protect the town from future attacks. With the help of a local historian, I discovered an ancient ritual that involved a blend of herbs, a sacred chant, and the light of the full moon. The ritual was said to appease the spirits and lift the curse, allowing the werewolves to return to their human forms and find peace. On the night of the next full moon, I gathered the necessary ingredients and made my way back to the clearing where I had first seen the creature. As the moon rose high in the sky, I performed the ritual, chanting the sacred words and burning the herbs in a small fire. The air grew still, and for a moment, I felt a presence around me, watching and waiting. Then, as if in response to the ritual, the howls began again. But this time, they were differenter, almost mournful. The creature emerged from the shadows, its eyes fixed on me. I continued the chant, my voice steady, despite the fear coursing through me. Slowly, the creature's form began to change, its fur receding, and its features becoming more human. When the transformation was complete, a man stood before me, his eyes filled with gratitude and relief. He introduced himself as Ethan, a local hunter who had been cursed centuries ago. He thanked me for freeing him and told me that the spirits of the other cursed hunters would also find peace. Ethan's story spread through the town, and the legend of the werewolf curse became a part of Moonlit Falls history. The forest returned to its tranquil state, and the howls of the night became a distant memory. My name is Patrick, and I was a librarian in the quaint town of Red Creek. Nestled in the rolling hills of Appalachia, Red Creek was a place where everyone knew everyone else, and life moved at a gentle pace. My days were filled with the quiet comfort of books, the rustling of pages, and the soft murmur of patrons discussing the latest novels. Little did I know that my love for history and folklore would lead me to a terrifying encounter with the creature straight out of legend. The town of Red Creek was steeped in history, with stories passed down through generations about the supernatural and the unexplained. One tale that always fascinated me was the legend of the Red Creek werewolf. According to local lore, a beast with the body of a man and the head of a wolf roamed the woods on the outskirts of town. It was said to be a cursed soul, doomed to wander the forest under the light of the full moon. I had always dismissed these stories as mere folklore, but my curiosity led me to collect and catalog every piece of information I could find about the legend. Old newspaper clippings, journals, and eyewitness accounts filled a special section of the library dedicated to local history. The more I read, the more intrigued I became, and I often spent my evenings poring over these documents, piecing together the story of the Red Creek werewolf. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and the library emptied out, I found myself engrossed in an old journal I had never seen before. It belonged to a man named Thomas McAllister, a local farmer who lived in the late 1800s. His entries detailed strange occurrences on his farm livestock disappearing, eerie howls in the night, and sightings of a large, wolf-like creature. The final entry in Thomas's journal sent a shiver down my spine. He described a moonlit night when the creature had come to his doorstep. In a fit of bravery or madness, he had decided to confront it, armed with nothing but a lantern and a silver knife. The entry ended abruptly, with a scribbled note that read, "I hear it now, scratching at the door. If this be my last entry, may God have mercy on my soul." As I closed the journal, I felt a strange compulsion to visit the old McAllister farm. The property had long been abandoned, but it was still accessible through a narrow, winding path that led into the forest. The full moon was due that night, and despite my better judgment, I decided to go. I grabbed a flashlight, my notebook, and a silver letter opener from my desk, a small token of protection, just in case. The hike to the McAllister farm was eerie, with shadows dancing in the moonlight, and the sounds of the forest, amplified by the stillness of the night. The farmhouse itself was a dilapidated structure, its windows broken and its walls covered in ivy. As I approached, I felt a growing sense of dread, as if the very air around me was thick with unseen menace. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The interior was a mess of broken furniture, rotting wood, and dust-covered relics of a bygone era. I made my way to the living room, where I found a large, ornate mirror hanging on the wall. In its reflection, I saw something move behind me, something large and shadowy. I spun around, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just as I was about to dismiss it as my imagination, I heard a low growl coming from the doorway. Slowly, I turned my flashlight toward the sound, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Standing in the doorway was the creature from the legends, a hulking figure covered in matted fur, with glowing eyes that pierced the darkness. Its snout was elongated, filled with sharp teeth that glinted in the light. It took a step forward, and I could see the powerful muscles rippling beneath its fur. In a moment of sheer terror, I raised the silver letter opener and held it out in front of me. The creature hesitated, its eyes narrowing as it sniffed the air. For a brief moment, it seemed almost human, flicker of recognition in its gaze. Then, with a deafening roar, it lunged at me. I ducked and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its claws. The creature crashed into the wall, splintering wood and sending debris flying. I scrambled to my feet and ran deeper into the house, my mind racing for a plan. I needed to find a way to escape or to stop the beast. As I ran, I remembered something I had read about werewolves, that they were vulnerable to silver. Clutching the letter opener, I made my way to the kitchen, hoping to find something that could help. My eyes fell on a set of silver candlesticks on the mantelpiece. I grabbed one and turned to face the doorway, ready to defend myself. The creature followed me into the kitchen, its eyes locked on mine. I brandished the candlestick, and it recoiled slightly, growling in frustration. Taking advantage of its hesitation, I lunged forward and struck it with the silver candlestick. The creature howled in pain, its flesh sizzling where the silver made contact. I struck again and again, the blow weakening the beast. Finally, with one last desperate swing, I hove the candlestick into its chest. The creature let out a final, agonized howl and collapsed to the floor, its body convulsing before falling still. I stood there, panting and covered in sweat, staring at the lifeless form of the werewolf. As the adrenaline subsided, I realized what I had done. I had killed the creature of legend, the Red Creek werewolf. But as I looked closer, I saw the transformation begin. The fur receded, the snout shortened, and before me lay the body of an old, weathered man, with a look of peace on his face. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The werewolf was Thomas McAllister, cursed to roam the woods for over a century. By killing him with silver, I had freed him from his torment. I felt a mix of relief and sorrow, knowing that the legend of the Red Creek werewolf had come to an end. In the days that followed, I shared my story with the town, and Thomas McAllister was finally given a proper burial. The legend of the werewolf became part of Red Creek's history, a tale of bravery, tragedy, and redemption. My name is Patrick, and this is my story. A story of how I faced a legend and uncovered the truth behind the curse of Red Creek. My name is Jasmine, and I am an anthropologist specializing in Native American cultures. My work often takes me to remote areas where I study and document the traditions and stories of indigenous tribes. My most recent assignment brought me to the Navajo Nation in Arizona, a vast and beautiful land, filled with ancient history and rich culture. Little did I know that my academic pursuit would lead me to a terrifying encounter with a creature from the darkest corners of Navajo lore, the Skinwalker. The Navajo people have a deep and profound respect for the land and the spirits that inhabit it. Their stories and legends are filled with beings that possess supernatural powers. And among the most feared and respected of these beings are the Skinwalkers. According to legend, a Skinwalker is a witch who has gained the ability to transform into any animal they desire. These beings are said to be incredibly powerful and dangerous, often using their abilities to harm others. My interest in Skinwalker legends was purely academic. I wanted to understand the cultural significance of these stories and how they influenced the daily lives of the Navajo people. I spent weeks interviewing elders, recording their stories, and immersing myself in the local culture. Despite the warnings and the palpable fear surrounding the topic, I remained skeptical about the existence of Skinwalkers. That skepticism would soon be shattered. One evening, after a long day of interviews, I found myself driving back to the small cabin where I was staying. The sun had just set, and the desert was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The road was deserted, and the only sounds were the hum of my car's engine and the distant cries of coyotes. As I drove, I noticed a figure standing by the side of the road. It was an elderly Navajo woman, her long hair flowing in the wind, her face etched with lines of wisdom and age. I slowed down and pulled over, rolling down my window to ask if she needed a ride. She didn't respond, but her eyes locked onto mine, and a chill ran down my spine. There was something unsettling about her gaze, something that made me feel as if she could see right through me. After a moment of silence, she nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the tension in the car palpable. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and filled with an ancient sadness. "You should not be here," she said. "The land does not welcome outsiders, especially those who seek the forbidden knowledge." I tried to explain that I was an anthropologist, that I was here to learn and respect the culture, but she shook her head. "Some things are not meant to be understood by those who do not belong," she said. "There are forces at work here that you cannot comprehend." As she spoke, I noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. A pair of glowing eyes watching us from the darkness. My heart raced, and I glanced over at the woman, but she seemed unfazed. "Do you see them?" I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded slowly. "They have been following you. They do not like that you are here, that you are prying into their secrets." Panic set in, and I pressed down on the accelerator, eager to put distance between us and whatever was out there. The woman remained calm, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Do not show fear," she said. "They feed on it." As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something malevolent was lurking just out of sight. The woman began to chant softly in Navajo, her words a soothing melody that seemed to keep the darkness at bay. I didn't understand what she was saying, but the fear that gripped my heart slowly began to subside. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the outskirts of a small village. The woman directed me to stop, and she climbed out of the car. "Thank you," she said, her voice kind but firm. "Remember what I have told you. Some knowledge is best left untouched." Before I could respond, she disappeared into the night, leaving me alone in the car, shaken and confused. I decided to head straight to my cabin, my mind racing with questions and fear. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those glowing eyes again, but the road remained empty. That night, I couldn't sleep. The woman's words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I decided to leave the Navajo Nation the next day, cutting my research trip short. But before I left, I wanted to pay my respects to the elders who had shared their stories with me. The next morning, I visited the home of Chief Gray Wolf, an elder who had been particularly welcoming and insightful. I told him about my encounter with the woman and the glowing eyes. His expression grew serious, and he nodded knowingly. "You have encountered a skinwalker," he said. "They are powerful witches who can take the form of animals. They guard our secrets and our land from those who seek to exploit them." I asked him if there was anything I could do to protect myself. He handed me a small pouch filled with herbs and a piece of turquoise. "These will offer some protection," he said. "But the best protection is to leave this place and not return. The skinwalkers will not forget you." I thanked him and left, my heart heavy with a mixture of gratitude and fear. As I drove away from the village, I couldn't help but feel a deep respect for the Navajo people and their traditions. They lived in harmony with forces that were beyond my understanding, forces that demanded respect and caution. Years have passed since that encounter, but the memory remains vivid. I no longer doubt the existence of skinwalkers or the power they hold. My academic curiosity has been replaced by a profound respect for the mysteries of the world, and the cultures that understand them far better than I ever could. The crisp autumn air was invigorating as I started my evening patrol through Cedarwood National Forest. The vibrant colors of the leaves created a picturesque scene, and the sounds of the forest were a symphony of nature. I had always loved this time of year, when the forest seemed alive with both color and sound. As a park ranger, I had heard countless tales of strange occurrences in the forest, disappearing hikers, unexplained lights, and eerie sounds. Most of these stories were dismissed as the overactive imaginations of campers or the effects of isolation. But one story, in particular, had always intrigued me: the tale of the phantom light. According to legend, a mysterious light would appear deep in the forest, leading those who followed it to their doom. The light was said to be the spirit of a long-dead ranger, guiding lost souls into the afterlife. Skeptical, but curious, I had always wanted to see this light for myself. As I walked along the familiar trails, my flashlight illuminating the path ahead, I thought about the stories. It was easy to see how the dense forest and its shifting shadows could play tricks on the mind. I was nearing the old fire tower when I noticed something unusual: a faint glow in the distance, deep within the forest. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to investigate. The glow was unlike anything I had seen before, a soft, pulsating light that seemed to beckon me. I radioed in my position, letting my colleagues know where I was heading, and then set off toward the light. The forest was eerily silent as I made my way through the trees. The light grew brighter as I approached, casting an otherworldly glow on the surroundings. It seemed to move, dancing through the trees, always just out of reach. I followed the light for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper into the forest. The terrain became more rugged, and the air grew colder. Despite my growing sense of unease, I pressed on, determined to uncover the source of the light. Finally, I reached a small clearing, and there, in the center, stood the source of the glow: a lantern, hanging from a low branch. It swung gently, as if moved by an unseen hand. I approached cautiously, my flashlight trained on the lantern. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. The lantern was old, its metal frame rusted and its glass cracked. Yet, it burned brightly, casting a warm, inviting light. I reached out to touch it, but as soon as my fingers brushed against the metal, the light went out, plunging the clearing into darkness. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then, out of the darkness, I heard a voice, a soft, mournful whisper. "Help me." I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. The voice came again, closer this time. "Please, help me." I followed the sound, my flashlight beam dancing through the trees. I could hear the voice clearly now, a woman's voice, filled with desperation. It led me to a small cave, hidden among the rocks at the edge of the clearing. I stepped inside, my flashlight revealing a narrow passageway that led deeper into the cave. The air was damp and cold, and the walls were covered in moss. The voice continued, guiding me through the darkness. "Please, help me." I followed the passage until it opened up into a larger chamber. There, in the center of the chamber, I saw here a woman, dressed in tattered clothes, her face pale and gaunt. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear and hope. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trapped here for so long." "Who are you?" I asked, stepping closer. "My name is Emily," she replied. "I was hiking with my friends when I got lost. I found this cave and thought it would be safe, but I couldn't find my way out." I reached out to help her, and as soon as our hands touched, the cave was filled with a blinding light. I closed my eyes against the brightness, and when I opened them again, we were standing outside, the morning sun just beginning to rise. Emily looked around, her eyes wide with wonder. "I'm free," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." I radioed for help, and soon, a rescue team arrived to take Emily to the hospital. She was weak and dehydrated, but otherwise unharmed. She told her story to the authorities, and a search team was sent to investigate the cave. They found no trace of the lantern or the mysterious light. Emily's friends were overjoyed to see her, and she made a full recovery. She never spoke of the strange light or the voice that had led her to safety. As for me, I continue my duties as a ranger, always vigilant, always mindful of the unseen forces that dwell within the park. The legend of the phantom light persists, but now, I know the truth. The light is not a malevolent spirit, but a guide, leading lost souls to safety. And as long as I am a ranger, I will never forget the night I followed the phantom light and brought a lost soul back from the darkness. The sun was setting over Redwood National Park, casting long shadows through the towering trees. The forest, known for its majestic redwoods and diverse wildlife, was my second home. As a park ranger, I spent countless hours patrolling the trails, ensuring the safety of visitors and the preservation of the park's natural beauty. However, one area of the park had always piqued my curiosity: the echoing cave. The cave was located in a remote part of the park, accessible only by a narrow, winding trail. It was named for the strange echoes that emanated from its depths, sounds that defied explanation. Over the years, numerous hikers had reported hearing whispers and ghostly voices near the cave, leading to its reputation as a haunted site. One autumn evening, driven by a mix of curiosity and duty, I decided to investigate the cave myself. I radioed my location to the station and set off, my flashlight and gear in hand. The trail was overgrown and rarely used, but I knew it well. As I approached the cave, the forest grew darker, the shadows deeper and more menacing. When I reached the entrance, a chill ran down my spine. The cave mouth was a gaping maw, framed by jagged rocks and dense underbrush. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air was damp and cool, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the darkness. I ventured deeper, the light from the entrance fading behind me. The cave's passageways twisted and turned, and I soon found myself in a large chamber. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, and the floor was littered with rocks and debris. As I stood there, the echoing sounds began with whispers, growing louder and more distinct. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but the whispers soon became clear, words spoken in a language I didn't recognize. I shone my flashlight around the chamber, looking for any sign of the source, but found nothing. The whispers continued, surrounding me, filling the space with an otherworldly presence. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. The echoes ceased, replaced by a deafening silence. For a moment, I thought I was alone, but then I saw a faint, flickering light at the far end of the chamber. It was small, like a candle flame, and it beckoned me forward. Cautiously, I approached, my flashlight guiding the way. As I neared the light, I saw a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, sitting against the cave wall. He looked up as I approached, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Help me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I've been trapped here for so long." "Who are you?" I asked, kneeling beside him. "My name is William," he replied. "I was a miner, back in the 1800s. My team and I were exploring these caves when there was a collapse. I've been here ever since, unable to find my way out." I looked at him in disbelief. A miner from the 1800s? It seemed impossible, yet here he was, flesh and blood, speaking to me. I reached out to touch him, and my hand passed through him as if he were made of smoke. "I don't understand," I said, pulling back. "How is this possible?" "I don't know," he replied, his voice filled with despair. "But I need your help, please, guide me out of here." I nodded, though I wasn't sure how I could help a ghost. I stood up and gestured for him to follow me. As we made our way back through the cave, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be warning me, urging me to turn back, but I pressed on, determined to help William. We reached the cave entrance, and the first rays of moonlight illuminated the path ahead. William paused at the threshold, his face a mixture of hope and fear. "Thank you," he said, his form beginning to fade. "You've set me free." With those words, he vanished, leaving me standing alone at the cave entrance. The whispers ceased, replaced by the sounds of the forest rustling leaves, distant animal calls, and the soft murmur of the wind. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Had I really encountered the spirit of a long-dead miner? It seemed impossible, yet I couldn't deny what I had seen and heard. I radioed the station to let them know I was heading back, my mind racing with questions. Over the next few days, I did some research on the history of the area. I discovered that, in the late 1800s, a team of miners had indeed been trapped in a cave-in Redwood National Park. The search efforts had been called off after weeks of unsuccessful attempts to rescue them, and the miners were presumed dead. Among them was a man named William Bennett. The story of the echoing cave took on a new meaning for me. It was no longer just a tale of ghostly whispers. It was a reminder of the past, of lives lost and stories untold. I shared my experience with my fellow rangers, and we agreed to keep a closer watch on the area, ensuring that no one else would get lost in the cave's labyrinthine passages. To this day, I patrol the park with a renewed sense of purpose, always listening for the echoes of the past. The forest holds many secrets, and the echoing cave is just one of them. And as long as I am here, I will never forget the night I encountered the spirit of William Bennett and helped him find his way home. The morning mist lingered in the valleys of Twin Peaks National Park, creating an ethereal landscape. I had always found a strange beauty in the park's foggy mornings, where the world seemed to be cloaked in mystery. As a park ranger, I had grown accustomed to the park's secrets. But there was one place that still held an air of the unknown: the old watchtower. Built in the early 1900s, the watchtower was a relic of the past. It had been used by forest rangers to spot wildfires in the days before modern technology. Over the years, it had fallen into disrepair, becoming a forgotten part of the park's history. Rumors of strange occurrences and ghostly sightings had surrounded the watchtower for decades, but they were mostly dismissed as local folklore. One crisp autumn day, I decided to visit the watchtower. The recent reports of strange lights and noises coming from the area had piqued my curiosity. I radioed my location to the ranger station and began the hike up the old, overgrown trail leading to the watchtower. The path was steep and rocky, winding through dense forest. The trees, tall and imposing, seemed to close in around me as I climbed higher. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence settled over the woods. I finally reached the clearing where the watchtower stood, its silhouette stark against the gray sky. The watchtower was a tall, rickety structure, its wooden beams weathered and worn. As I approached, I noticed something unusual: a faint light flickering in one of the windows. My heart skipped a beat. The tower had no electricity, and no one had been there for years. I decided to investigate. Climbing the creaky wooden steps, I reached the door and pushed it open. The interior was dark and musty, filled with the scent of decay and neglect. I shone my flashlight around, revealing old furniture, maps, and equipment scattered about. The light I had seen from outside flickered again, coming from the top floor. I climbed the narrow staircase, each step groaning under my weight. When I reached the top, I found the source of the light: a lantern, burning brightly on a table. The lantern was old, its metal frame rusted and its glass dirty, but it shone with a steady, unnatural light. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, felt a presence behind me. I turned around quickly, my flashlight illuminating the figure of a man. He was dressed in an old ranger uniform, his face lined with age and worry. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The man looked at me with sad, weary eyes. "My name is Henry," he said. "I was the watchman here many years ago." I knew the name. Henry Thompson had been the head ranger of Twin Peaks National Park in the 1920s. He was a dedicated ranger, known for his commitment to protecting the park. According to the stories, he had disappeared one night while on duty, and his body was never found. "What happened to you?" I asked, stepping closer. Henry sighed. "There was a fire," he said. "A terrible fire that threatened to consume the entire park. I stayed to fight it, to warn others. But I got trapped, and I perished in the flames. Since then, been here, watching over the park, unable to move on." I looked at him, a mixture of awe and sorrow filling my heart. "Is there any way to help you?" "I don't know," Henry replied. "I've tried to leave, but something keeps me here. Maybe it's my duty, my unfinished work." I thought for a moment, then had an idea. "What if we finish your work together?" I suggested. "We could make sure the park is safe, that the old watchtower is restored. Maybe then you can find peace." Henry looked at me, hope flickering in his eyes. "You would do it?" I nodded. "Yes, I would. It's the least I can do for a fellow ranger." Over the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly to restore the old watchtower. I repaired the broken steps, cleaned the windows, and even brought in a new lantern to replace the old one. Henry was always there, guiding me, helping me understand the history of the park and the importance of the watchtower. As we worked, I felt a bond forming between us, a connection that transcended time. I learned about Henry's life, his dedication to the park, and his love for the natural world. He told me stories of the old days, of the challenges he faced and the triumphs he achieved. Finally, the day came when the watchtower was restored to its former glory. It stood tall and proud, a symbol of the park's history and resilience. As I lit the new lantern and placed it in the window, I felt a sense of accomplishment and peace. Henry stood beside me, a look of gratitude on his face. "Thank you," he said softly. "You've done more than I could have ever hoped for." I smiled at him. "It was an honor, Henry. You can rest now, knowing the park is safe." He nodded, and for the first time, I saw a lightness in his eyes. "Goodbye, my friend," he said, his form beginning to fade. "Take care of the park." And with those words, he vanished, leaving me alone in the watchtower. The lantern burned brightly, casting a warm, comforting glow. I stood there for a long time, reflecting on the journey and the connection I had made with the ghost from the past. From that day forward, the old watchtower became a symbol of hope and resilience for the park. Visitors came to see it, to hear the story of Henry Thompson and the ranger who helped him find peace. And I continued my duties, always vigilant, always mindful of the spirits that watched over the park. The forest held many secrets, but now, I knew that some of those secrets were guardians, protecting the land they loved, even in death. And as long as I was a ranger, I would honor their legacy, ensuring that the park remained a place of beauty and wonder for generations to come. There are places within Hollow Creek National Park where the trees grow so thick that sunlight barely pierces the canopy, and shadows seem to take on a life of their own. As a seasoned park ranger, I thought I had seen it all, but one haunting experience forever changed my perspective on the unseen mysteries of the forest. It was early spring, and the snow had just begun to melt, revealing the hidden trails and secret paths that had been buried under a blanket of white. My assignment was to check the more remote areas of the park, ensuring the trails were clear and safe for the upcoming tourist season. Hollow Creek had always been known for its picturesque beauty and serene environment, but it also had its share of legends and ghost stories. I was partnered with a new recruit, Emily, who had recently joined our team. She was enthusiastic and eager to learn, but I could tell she was also a bit apprehensive about the darker tales associated with the park. We set out early in the morning, our breath visible in the crisp, cold air as we made our way to the northern sector of the park. The hike was uneventful at first, with the usual sights and sounds of nature surrounding us. Birds chirped, and the occasional rustle of small animals echoed through the trees. Emily and I chatted about the park's history and our experiences, trying to keep the mood light. However, as we ventured deeper into the forest, an unsettling silence fell over the area. We reached a clearing that marked the entrance to an old, forgotten trailone that hadn't been used in years. The trees here seemed older, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I could feel Emily's unease growing, but I assured her that it was just another part of the park that needed our attention. As we walked, I noticed something odd. The ground was covered in a layer of frost, despite the warming temperatures. It felt colder here, and a chill ran down my spine. Emily was the first to see a figure standing in the distance, partially obscured by the trees. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but as we got closer, I realized that something was off. The figure was dressed in an old ranger uniform, the kind that hadn't been used in decades. He stood motionless, staring at us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His face was pale and expressionless, and his eyes seemed to bore into my soul. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned and walked deeper into the forest, disappearing from sight. Emily looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Who was that?" she whispered. "I'm not sure," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we should follow him." We continued down the trail, our senses heightened and our hearts pounding. The cold seemed to intensify with each step, and an unnatural fog began to creep in, making it hard to see. The trees loomed larger, and the forest felt like it was closing in around us. After what felt like an eternity, we reached another clearing. In the center stood an old cabin, its wooden walls weathered and its windows dark. The cabin had been abandoned for years, and it was rumored to be haunted by the ghost of a ranger who had died under mysterious circumstances. We approached the cabin cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. As we stepped inside, the temperature dropped even further, and the air grew thick with the scent of decay. The interior was just as I remembered: dusty furniture, broken windows, and a sense of desolation that seemed to hang in the air. In the center of the room stood the figure we had seen earlier. He turned to face us, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice echoing through the cabin. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "We're park rangers," I said. "We're here to check the trails and ensure everything is safe." "Who are you?" the figure sighed, his shoulders sagging with the weight of years. "My name is Samuel," he said. "I was a ranger here many years ago. This was my cabin." Emily and I exchanged glances, the eerie reality of our situation sinking in. "What happened to you, Samuel?" I asked gently. Samuel's gaze seemed to pierce through the layers of time. "It was the winter of 1978, he began. A terrible storm hit the park, trapping a group of campers in the northern sector. I set out to find them, but I got lost in the blizzard. By the time I found the campers, it was too late. They had all perished. I tried to make it back to the cabin, but the cold was too much. I died out there in the snow, never able to save them." A heavy silence filled the room, punctuated only by the distant howl of the wind. "I've been wandering these woods ever since," Samuel continued. "I'm bound here by my failure, unable to move on." Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Is there anything we can do to help you?" Samuel looked at her with a mixture of hope and despair. "I don't know," he said softly. "Maybe if the campers' bodies were found and given a proper burial, I could find peace." We knew what we had to do. Emily and I promised Samuel we would search for the remains of the campers and give them the dignity they deserved. With a final, sorrowful look, Samuel faded into the shadows, leaving us alone in the cabin. The next few days were some of the most challenging of my career. Emily and I scoured the northern sector, battling the elements and the dense underbrush. We eventually found the remains of the campers, their bodies preserved by the cold. It was a sobering sight, a stark reminder of the power of nature and the fragility of life. We carefully collected the remains and brought them back to the park headquarters, where we arranged for a proper burial. The local community came together to honor the lost campers, and a memorial was erected in their memory. That night, Emily and I returned to the old cabin. As we approached, we saw Samuel standing outside, his form more transparent than before. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You've done more for me than I could have ever hoped." With those words, Samuel slowly began to fade, his spirit finally at peace. The temperature around us warmed, and the oppressive feeling that had haunted the area lifted. It was as if the forest itself breathed a sigh of relief. Emily and I stood there for a long time, reflecting on the events that had transpired. We had not only uncovered a tragic piece of the park's history, but had also helped a restless soul find peace. It was a humbling experience, one that reinforced the importance of our roles as park rangers. From that day forward, we made it a point to visit the memorial regularly, paying our respects to the lost campers and remembering Samuel, the Phantom Ranger of Hollow Creek. The old cabin, once a place of sorrow and despair, it became a symbol of hope and redemption. The forest still held its secrets, but we knew that some of those secrets were now at rest, their stories told and their spirits at peace. And as long as we were rangers, we would continue to protect and honor the land, ensuring that its beauty and history were preserved for future generations. There are parts of Timber Hollow State Park that seem to whisper with the voices of the past, where the wind carries tales of old, and the trees stand as silent witnesses to the passage of time. As a park ranger, I've learned to listen to these whispers, to respect the stories woven into the fabric of the forest. But there was one tale that was louder than the rest, one that demanded to be heard and remembered. It was early autumn, when the leaves had turned to brilliant shades of red and gold, and the air was crisp with the promise of cooler days. I was assigned to patrol the eastern sector of the park, an area known for its dense woods and winding trails. It was a quiet day, with few visitors venturing so deep into the forest. As I walked along the narrow path, I noticed something unusual: a series of old, rusted traps scattered along the trail. They were relics from a bygone era, likely set by trappers long before the area became a protected park. I carefully disarmed each one, making a mental note to report them to my supervisor. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt an odd sensation, as if I were being watched. It wasn't the usual feeling of being observed by wildlife. It was something more intense, more unsettling. I brushed it off as my imagination and continued on my route. As I approached a particularly dense section of the forest, I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping sound. It was steady and insistent, echoing through the trees. Curiosity piqued, I followed the sound, pushing through the underbrush until I reached a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old, abandoned cabin. Its wooden walls were covered in moss, and the roof had partially collapsed. The tapping sound was louder now, emanating from within. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, flashlight in hand. The interior of the cabin was dark and filled with the musty scent of decay. Broken furniture lay scattered about, and cobwebs hung in the corners. The tapping sound continued, leading me to a small, back room. As I entered, I saw the Sorcy typewriter, its keys moving on their own, typing out words at a feverish pace. I watched in stunned silence as the typewriter clacked away, the words appearing on the yellowed paper in front of it. "Help me," it typed, over and over again. My heart raced, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I reached out to touch the typewriter, but as soon as my fingers brushed the keys, the tapping stopped. The cabin fell silent, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I backed away slowly, my mind racing with questions. Who was trying to communicate, and why? Leaving the cabin, I marked its location on my map, and hurried back to the ranger station. I needed to speak with someone who might know more about the park's history. As I arrived, I found Mark, one of the senior rangers, and relayed my experience to him. Mark listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each word. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You're not the first to encounter something strange in that area," he said. "There's a legend about Timber Hollow, story that goes back many years." He told me about a man named Henry Turner, a writer who had lived in the cabin during the early 1900s. Henry was known for his eerie, supernatural tales, and it was rumored that his stories were based on real events. One winter, Henry disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only his typewriter and a stack of unfinished manuscripts. Some say his spirit haunts the cabin, trying to finish the stories he started, Mark explained. Others believe he's trapped there, unable to move on until his work is complete. Determined to learn more, I spent the next few days researching Henry Turner and his life. I read his published works, scoured old newspapers, and even visited the local library to find any records related to his disappearance. The more I uncovered, the more convinced I became that Henry's spirit was indeed tied to the cabin. With Mark's help, I gathered a team of rangers and returned to the cabin. We decided to conduct a thorough investigation, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain the supernatural activity. As we entered the cabin, the air grew colder, and the tapping sound resumed, echoing through the empty rooms. We set up cameras and audio equipment, documenting every detail. Hours passed, and the tapping continued, sometimes accompanied by faint whispers and shadows that seemed to move on their own. It was as if the cabin itself was alive, pulsating with energy. In the back room, I sat at the typewriter, watching the keys move once again. "Help me," typed, the words pleading and desperate. I spoke aloud, addressing Henry directly. "What do you need, Henry? How can we help you?" For a moment, the tapping stopped, and a heavy silence filled the room. Then, the typewriter sprang to life, typing out a new message. "Finish my story," it read. I have always loved the serene beauty of Blackwood Forest, a place where time seemed to stand still, and nature's majesty could be experienced in its purest form. As a park ranger, I had spent countless hours wandering its trails, ensuring the safety of visitors and the preservation of its ecosystem. Little did I know that this forest held a secret far more extraordinary than I could have ever imagined. It was a crisp autumn morning when I first noticed something unusual. The forest was quieter than usual, the birdsong absent, and the rustling leaves muted. I was patrolling the southern sector, an area known for its dense trees and winding paths. My radio crackled to life, and my colleague, Sarah, reported a strange sighting near the old watchtower. Curious, I made my way to the watchtower, an old structure that had been abandoned years ago. As I approached, I saw Sarah standing at the base, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "You need to see this," she said, pointing to the ground. There, imprinted in the soft earth, were large, clawed footprints. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, too big to belong to any known animal in the area. The tracks led away from the watchtower, disappearing into the dense underbrush. "What do you think made these?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with unease. "I'm not sure," I replied, examining the prints closely. "But whatever it is, it's not something I've encountered before." We decided to follow the tracks, hoping to find answers. The path they led us on was treacherous, winding through thick vegetation and over rocky terrain. As we ventured deeper into the forest, an eerie feeling settled over us, as if we were being watched. After what felt like hours, we reached a small clearing. In the center stood a large, ancient tree, its gnarled branches stretching skyward like skeletal fingers. The tracks led directly to the base of the tree and then vanished. Sarah and I exchanged puzzled glances. "Maybe it climbed the tree?" she suggested. "Or maybe it disappeared," I muttered, feeling a chill run down my spine. Something about the tree seemed off, as if it were more than just an ordinary tree. As we circled the tree, searching for more clues, I noticed a faint glow emanating from a hollow in the trunk. Cautiously, I approached and peered inside. To my astonishment, I saw a small, ornate box nestled within the hollow, its surface covered in intricate carvings. "What is that?" Sarah asked, her eyes widening. "I don't know, but it looks ancient," I replied, reaching for the box. As my fingers brushed its surface, a sudden rush of energy surged through me, and the forest around us seemed to shimmer. Before I could react, a figure stepped out from behind the tree. It was a tall, imposing figure, cloaked in shadows, with eyes that glowed like embers. Sarah and I froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. The figure regarded us silently for a moment before speaking in a deep, resonant voice. "I am the guardian of Blackwood Forest," it said. "I have protected this land for centuries, ensuring the balance of nature is maintained." Sarah and I exchanged stunned glances. "What do you want from us?" she asked. The guardian's eyes seemed to pierce through us. "You have found the Box of Elements," it said. "It is a powerful artifact, capable of controlling the forces of nature. But it must be used wisely, or it could bring destruction." I glanced at the box in my hands, its weight suddenly feeling immense. "We didn't mean to disturb anything," I said. "We were just following the tracks." The guardian nodded. "I know, but now that you have found it, you must protect it. The forest is in danger, and the Box of Elements is the key to saving it." "What kind of danger?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The guardian's expression darkened. "There is a creature that seeks to harness the power of the box for its own gain. It is a being of darkness, born from the shadows of the forest. If it succeeds, Blackwood Forest will fall into chaos." A sense of determination welled up within me. "What can we do to stop it?" I asked. I have always loved the serene beauty of Blackwood Forest, a place where time seemed to stand still, and nature's majesty could be experienced in its purest form. As a park ranger, I had spent countless hours wandering its trails, ensuring the safety of visitors and the preservation of its ecosystem. Little did I know that this forest held a secret far more extraordinary than I could have ever imagined. It was a crisp autumn morning when I first noticed something unusual. The forest was quieter than usual, the birdsong absent, and the rustling leaves muted. I was patrolling the southern sector, an area known for its dense trees and winding paths. My radio crackled to life, and my colleague, Sarah, reported a strange sighting near the old watchtower. Curious, I made my way to the watchtower, an old structure that had been abandoned years ago. As I approached, I saw Sarah standing at the base, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "You need to see this," she said, pointing to the ground. There, imprinted in the soft earth, were large, clawed footprints. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, too big to belong to any known animal in the area. The tracks led away from the watchtower, disappearing into the dense underbrush. "What do you think made these?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with unease. "I'm not sure," I replied, examining the prints closely. "But whatever it is, it's not something I've encountered before." We decided to follow the tracks, hoping to find answers. The path they led us on was treacherous, winding through thick vegetation and over rocky terrain. As we ventured deeper into the forest, an eerie feeling settled over us, as if we were being watched. After what felt like hours, we reached a small clearing. In the center stood a large, ancient tree, its gnarled branches stretching skyward like skeletal fingers. The tracks led directly to the base of the tree and then vanished. Sarah and I exchanged puzzled glances. "Maybe it climbed the tree," she suggested. "Or maybe it disappeared," I muttered, feeling a chill run down my spine. Something about the tree seemed off, as if it were more than just an ordinary tree. As we circled the tree, searching for more clues, I noticed a faint glow emanating from a hollow in the trunk. Cautiously, I approached and peered inside. To my astonishment, I saw a small, ornate box nestled within the hollow, its surface covered in intricate carvings. The guardian extended a hand, and a small, shimmering stone appeared in its palm. "This stone will guide you to the creature's lair," it said. "You must confront it and reclaim the balance. The Box of Elements will help you, but you must be brave and wise." With that, the guardian stepped back into the shadows and vanished. Sarah and I stood in stunned silence, the weight of our newfound responsibility sinking in. We knew we couldn't do this alone. We returned to the ranger station and gathered a team of trusted colleagues, explaining the situation to them. Though skeptical, they agreed to help, understanding the importance of protecting the forest. Armed with the box of elements and the guardian stone, we set out on our mission. The stone glowed brightly, leading us through the forest to a hidden cave deep within the heart of Blackwood. As we approached, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over us. Inside the cave, we found the creature, a massive, shadowy beast with eyes that glowed like coals. It roared in fury as we entered, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. "Stay together," I shouted, holding the box of elements aloft. As I opened the box, a blinding light filled the cave, illuminating the creature and revealing its true form. The box of elements responded to our collective will, harnessing the power of the forest. We directed its energy towards the creature, weakening it with each passing moment. The battle was fierce, but our determination and unity gave us strength. In a final, desperate surge, the creature lunged at us, but we stood firm. The box of elements unleashed a burst of energy, enveloping the creature in a radiant glow. With a final, ear-piercing roar, the creature dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only a faint wisp of shadow. Exhausted but victorious, we emerged from the cave, the forest around us alive with the sounds of nature once more. The guardian appeared before us, its eyes filled with gratitude. "You have done well," it said. "The balance has been restored, and the forest is safe." As the guardian faded into the forest, we knew our work was far from over. The box of elements was now our responsibility, a powerful tool to protect Blackwood Forest from any future threats. We vowed to use it wisely, to honor the legacy of the guardian and ensure the safety of the forest for generations to come. And so, the legend of the guardian and the box of elements became another chapter in the history of Blackwood Forest. A reminder of the unseen forces that protect and sustain the natural world. As park rangers, we carried that legacy with pride, knowing that we were the stewards of something far greater than ourselves. Every forest has its secrets, and Ravenwood was no different. Known for its dense canopy and winding trails, Ravenwood had an air of mystery that both drew people in and kept them wary. My name is Carla, and as a forest ranger, it was my duty to ensure the safety and preservation of this vast, enigmatic land. Little did I know that my routine patrols would soon lead me into an encounter that would change everything. It all began one foggy morning in early spring. The mist hung heavy in the air, and visibility was low as I navigated the trails near the northern edge of the forest. Reports had come in about strange noises and flickering lights seen in the distance during the night. Most chalked it up to overactive imaginations or pranksters, but I was determined to get to the bottom of it. As I made my way deeper into the woods, I felt an eerie stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. My radio crackled, breaking the silence, and a familiar voice came through. "Carla, this is Jake. Have you found anything unusual?" "Not yet, Jake," I replied, "but there's definitely something off about this place today." "Be careful," he warned. "I've heard rumors about this area." I clicked off the radio and continued on, my senses on high alert. The path ahead led to an old, abandoned cabin, a relic from the days when loggers had once worked these woods. As I approached, I saw faint, flickering lights inside the cabin, casting eerie shadows through the broken windows. Drawing closer, I'd hear faint whispers, like distant conversations carried on the wind. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the cabin's entrance. The door creaked open, revealing a dim interior lit by what seemed to be old oil lamps. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Is Anio Neher there?" Was no response, only the whispering, growing louder, more insistent. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. As I moved further in, I saw a figure standing at the far end of the room. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, her eyes wide and haunted. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Who are you?" I asked, stepping closer. "What happened to you?" She began to speak, but her words were drowned out by a sudden, chilling breeze that swept through the cabin, extinguishing the lamps and plunging the room into darkness. My flashlight flickered, and when it steadied, the woman was gone. I stood there, stunned and confused. What had I just witnessed? I searched the cabin thoroughly, but there was no sign of her or anyone else. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. I left the cabin, my mind racing. Back at the ranger station, I told Jake and the others what I had seen. They listened with a mix of skepticism and concern. "Sounds like you saw a ghost," Jake said, half joking. "Maybe I did," I replied, still shaken. But she seemed so real. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the image of the woman from my mind. I began to research the history of Ravenwood, hoping to find some clue about her identity. What I discovered was a tragic story that had been forgotten by time. Over a century ago, a small community had lived near the northern edge of the forest. Among them was a young woman named Eleanor, who was engaged to be married. But one fateful night, she had vanished without a trace, and despite extensive searches, she was never found. The community believed she had been taken by the forest, and her disappearance became a local legend. Determined to uncover the truth, I returned to the cabin, this time bringing Jake with me. As we approached, the same eerie stillness enveloped us. Inside, the cabin looked unchanged, but the atmosphere felt charged with unseen energy. We set up a few cameras and audio recorders, hoping to capture any paranormal activity. As night fell, we sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the forest. Hours passed, and just as we were about to call it a night, the whispers returned, louder and clearer than before. The air grew cold, and the figure of Eleanor appeared once more. This time, Jake saw her too, his expression one of shock and disbelief. "Please, help me find peace," she whispered again, her eyes pleading. "How can we help you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear. She pointed to a spot on the floor, and as she did, the boards creaked and shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, we found an old diary and a locket. The diary belonged to Eleanor, and it detailed her life in the community, her love for her fiancé, and the night she disappeared. According to the final entry, she had been meeting her fiancé in secret, as their families disapproved of their union. On the night she vanished, they had planned to elope, but she had been caught and taken away by force. The diary ended abruptly, leaving the rest of her fate a mystery. With the diary and locket in hand, we left the cabin and returned to the ranger station. The next day, we brought the items to the local historical society, hoping they could shed more light on Eleanor's story. The curator, an elderly woman named Mrs. Whitmore, was astounded by our discovery. "This locket belonged to Eleanor Green," she said, examining the delicate piece of jewelry. "She was engaged to Thomas Hartley, but their families were bitter rivals. Their love was forbidden." We showed her the diary, and she carefully translated the old, faded handwriting. As she read aloud, the tragic story of Eleanor and Thomas came to life. They had planned to run away together, but Eleanor was caught by her own father, who had locked her away in the cabin to prevent her escape. Thomas, unaware of her fate, had searched for her in vain until his dying day. Eleanor's spirit must be restless because her love story was never fulfilled, Mrs. Whitmore concluded. She needs closure. Determined to help Eleanor find peace, Jake and I returned to the cabin with the diary and locket. We hoped that acknowledging her love and loss might free her spirit. As we stood in the clearing, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves, and the atmosphere felt different, lighter. "Eleanor," I called out softly. "We know your story now. We know about your love for Thomas and the tragedy that kept you apart. We brought your locket and diary to honor your memory." The whispers returned, But this time they were gentle, like a sigh of relief. The air grew warmer, and a soft glow appeared near the ancient tree where we had first seen Eleanor. Her figure materialized, looking more serene and at peace than before. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying on the wind. "You have set me free." With that, she slowly faded away, her spirit finally at rest. The forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Jake and I stood there in silence, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. We had not only uncovered a forgotten piece of history, but also helped a lost soul find peace. As we walked back to the ranger station, I couldn't help but feel a deeper connection to Ravenwood Forest. It was a place of beauty and mystery, a place where the past and present intertwine. And as a forest ranger, I knew my role was not just to protect the forest, but also to honor the stories and spirits that called it home. From that day forward, the strange noises and flickering light ceased, and Ravenwood became a place of serenity once more. Visitors often remarked on the peaceful atmosphere, unaware of the secrets the forest held. And as for me, I continued my duties with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that sometimes the forest itself needed protection, not just from physical harm, but from the forgotten echoes of the past. The town of Cedar Hollow was nestled at the edge of Redwood National Park, a vast expanse of ancient trees and untamed wilderness. As a park ranger, my days were usually filled with routine patrols, guiding tourists, and ensuring the preservation of this majestic environment. But Cedar Hollow had its own legends, and one of the most haunting was the tale of the Lost Patrol. It was a story whispered among locals and seasoned rangers alike. Decades ago, a group of park rangers had ventured deep into the forest and never returned. Their disappearance remained a mystery, their fate unknown. Some said they had fallen victim to the treacherous terrain, while others believed something far more sinister had claimed them. I had always been intrigued by the legend, but it wasn't until I stumbled upon an old journal in the ranger station's attic that I became obsessed with uncovering the truth. The journal belonged to Samuel Harris, one of the rangers from the Lost Patrol. His last entry was dated 50 years ago, and it hinted at something extraordinary deep within the forest. "There's something here," he had written. "A presence that watches us, follows us. We must find out what it is." The entry sent chills down my spine. Determined to solve the mystery, I gathered a team of experienced Ranger Shenna, Tom, and Marcus and set out to retrace the steps of the Lost Patrol. We planned a 5-day expedition, equipped with modern technology and survival gear. Little did we know that we were about to uncover a truth far stranger and more terrifying than any of us could have imagined. On the first day, we followed the path marked in Samuel's journal, which led us deeper into the forest than any of us had ever ventured. The towering redwoods seemed to close in around us, their ancient branches whispering secrets in the wind. The forest was alive with sounds, rustling leaves, distant bird calls, and the occasional snap of a twig. By the second day, we had reached a remote area known as the Shadow Valley. The name itself was ominous, and the atmosphere grew heavier as we descended into the valley. The trees here were even older, their bark dark and gnarled. It felt as if we were stepping back in time, entering a world untouched by human hands. That night, as we set up camp, an unsettling stillness settled over the valley. The usual sounds of the forest were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. We huddled around the campfire, our conversation subdued. "Do you think the Lost Patrol came this way?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "According to the journal, they did," I replied. "But something happened to them here. We need to be cautious." Sleep was elusive that night, and when dawn finally broke, we continued our journey, our senses on high alert. As we trekked deeper into Shadow Valley, we began to notice strange symbols carved into the tree's ancient runes that none of us could decipher. They seemed to form a trail, leading us further into the heart of the valley. On the fourth day, we stumbled upon an old, overgrown trail that led to a hidden grove. In the center of the grove stood a massive stone altar, covered in moss and vines. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy, and we could all feel Ida presence watching us, just as Samuel had described. As we approached the altar, Marcus suddenly cried out. He had found something buried beneath the Levisa weathered backpack. Inside, we discovered an assortment of tools, a map, and a photograph. The photograph was of the lost patrol, smiling and full of life. My heart ached as I looked at their faces, knowing they had never made it out of this forest. "Do you hear that?" Tom asked, his voice trembling. We fell silent, and then we heard a faint, melodic humming, like a distant choir. The sound seemed to come from all around us, resonating through the trees. "We need to get out of here," Jenna said urgently. "This place isn't right." But it was too late. As we turned to leave, the ground beneath us began to tremble. The trees swayed violently, and the humming grew louder, almost deafening. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the altar, and we were thrown to the ground. When the light subsided, we found ourselves in a different place entirely. The grove was gone, replaced by a dense forest unlike any we had seen before. The air was thick with fog, and the trees seemed to glow with an ethereal light. "Where are we?" Marcus asked, his voice echoing strangely. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding. "But we need to stick together." We wandered through the strange forest, trying to find our bearings. The landscape was disorienting, with paths that twisted and turned, leading us in circles. It felt as if the forest itself was alive, guiding us toward some unknown destination. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a figure, cloaked in shadows. As we approached, the figure stepped forward, revealing the face of Samuel Harris. "Welcome," he said, his voice a haunting echo. "You have found the gateway." "The gateway to what?" I asked, struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. "To the realm beyond," he replied. "We were trapped here, caught between worlds. But you have the chance to leave, to break the cycle." "How?" Jenna asked, her voice trembling. "By closing the gateway," Samuel said. "Destroy the altar. It's the source of the power that holds us here." We didn't hesitate. Together, we made our way back to the grove, the strange forest warping and shifting around us. When we reached the altar, we used our tools to break it apart, stone by stone. As the last piece fell, the ground shook violently, and a blinding light engulfed us once more. When the light faded, we found ourselves back in Redwood National Park, standing at the edge of Shadow Valley. The grove and the altar were gone, as if they had never existed. We returned to Cedar Hollow, exhausted and shaken, but relieved to be back. The legend of the Lost Patrol had finally been put to rest, their spirits freed from the forest grasp. We reported our findings, but many details were left out, too unbelievable to explain. In the end, the forest kept its secrets, and we were left with the knowledge that some mysteries are best left unsolved. But one thing was certain: Lost Patrol had not been forgotten, and their story would live on, a testament to the power and mystery of the wild. Ranger at Pine Hollow for the past 7 years. The park is known for its challenging trails. Pine Hollow was one of those places where time seemed to stand still. The dense forest, with its towering pines and thick underbrush, held an air of ancient mystery. As a park ranger assigned to this remote area, I had heard countless stories of strange occurrences and ghostly sightings. But it wasn't until I experienced it firsthand that I understood the fear those tales inspired. My name is Ethan, and I've been a wreath-taking views, and the infamous legend of the Phantom Watcher. According to local lore, the Phantom Watcher was the spirit of a long-dead ranger who guarded the forest, punishing those who disrespected it. Many hikers reported seeing a shadowy figure watching them from a distance, only to vanish when approached. I was always skeptical of these stories. As someone who prided himself on rational thinking and scientific explanations, I believed that the so Called sightings were merely tricks of light and shadow, amplified by overactive imaginations. But my perspective changed one cold autumn evening. I was patrolling a less traveled trail deep within Pine Hollow, ensuring that all was well before the winter snows made the area impassable. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest floor. As I made my way through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was an eerie sensation, and despite my skepticism, it unsettled me. I decided to take a break and set up camp near an old, abandoned cabin. The cabin had a history of its own, rumored to have been the home of a hermit who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. I had camped there before without incident, so I saw no reason to be concerned. As darkness fell, I built a fire and settled in for the night. The forest was unnaturally quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl breaking the silence. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself that it was just the isolation playing tricks on my mind. Around midnight, as I was dozing off, I heard a soft, almost imperceptible sound like a whisper carried on the wind. I sat up, straining to listen. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, but I couldn't make out any words. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the cabin. Grabbing my flashlight, I cautiously approached the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers continued, echoing through the night. I reached the cabin and peered inside, but it was empty, just as I had left it. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath in the cold air. The whispers stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the clearing. I swung my flashlight toward the figure, but it vanished as soon as the beam touched it. My heart raced as I realized that I might be facing the Phantom Watcher. Trying to stay calm, I called out, "Who's there? Show yourself." There was no response, only the oppressive silence. I decided to return to my campfire, hoping that the warmth and light would drive away whatever presence I had encountered. As I sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. The next morning, I woke up feeling exhausted and on edge. I decided to cut my patrol short and head back to the ranger station. As I packed up my gear, I noticed something strange: a set of footprints in the dirt, leading away from the cabin. They were not mine, and they appeared to be very old, almost as if they had been imprinted in the ground decades ago. Intrigued and disturbed, I followed the footprints. They led me deep into the forest, to a place I had never been before. There, hidden among the trees, was an old, overgrown cemetery. The headstones were weathered and covered in moss, but I could still make out the names. One headstone stood out from the rest. It belonged to a man named Henry Parker, who had been a ranger in Pine Hollow over 100 years ago. According to the inscription, he had died under mysterious circumstances while on duty. As I stood there, reading the inscription, I felt a sudden chill. The air grew heavy, and the whispers returned, louder this time. I turned to leave, but standing between me and the path was the shadowy figure of the Phantom Watcher. My flashlight flickered as I tried to shine it on the figure. For the first time, I could make out some details: a tall man in an old ranger uniform, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. He raised his hand and pointed toward the headstone. "Respect the forest," he whispered, his voice echoing through the trees. "Protect it." With that, he vanished, leaving me alone in the cemetery. Shaken, I hurried back to the ranger station, my mind racing with what I had experienced. I reported the encounter to my supervisor, who listened with a mixture of concern and disbelief. Over the following days, I delved into the history of Pine Hollow, determined to learn more about Henry Parker and the Phantom Watcher. I discovered that Parker had been a dedicated ranger, passionate about preserving the forest. He had died while investigating illegal logging activities, and his body was never found. The legend of the Phantom Watcher began shortly after his disappearance, with many believing that his spirit had returned to protect the forest from those who would harm it. The more I learned, the more I understood that the stories were not mere Folklorithi were a reminder of the forest's need for guardianship and respect. From that day on, I approached my duties with a renewed sense of purpose. I shared Parker's story with visitors, emphasizing the importance of respecting the natural world. The encounters with the Phantom Watcher became less frequent, but I knew he was always watching, ensuring that Pine Hollow remained a place of beauty and mystery. In the end, the Phantom Watcher was not a malevolent spirit, but a guardian, protecting the forest he loved in life and beyond. And as long as I remained a ranger in Pine Hollow, I vowed to honor his legacy and uphold the values he stood for. Cedar Creek was known for its serene beauty and challenging trails, drawing hikers and campers from all over the country. As a park ranger, I had seen my fair share of accidents and lost hikers, but nothing could have prepared me for the events that unfolded one fateful summer. My name is Lucas, and I've been patrolling the Cedar Creek National Park for over a decade. I loved the job, the fresh air, the stunning vistas, and the sense of peace that came with being surrounded by nature. But the tranquility of the forest was shattered one hot July afternoon when a distress call came in. A group of campers had gone missing. They were a family of 4 parents, and their 2 teenage children. Renwo had planned to spend a week exploring the park's more remote areas. They had checked in with the ranger station upon arrival, and had been scheduled to return 3 days ago. Concerned relatives alerted us when they failed to make contact. I gathered a search team, and we set out immediately, armed with maps, radios, and supplies. The forest was dense, and the summer heat made the search even more exhausting. We started by retracing the family's planned route, hoping to find clues about their whereabouts. By the end of the first day, we had found nothing. No tracks, no signs of a campfire, no discarded gear. It was as if they had vanished without a trace. As the sun set, we set up camp and planned our strategy for the following day. The mood among the team was tense. All knew that time was of the essence. The second day began much like the first, with endless searching and growing frustration. Around noon, we stumbled upon an old, overgrown trail that wasn't marked on any of our maps. It seemed to lead deeper into the forest, toward an area known for its rugged terrain and treacherous cliffs. We decided to follow it, hoping it might lead us to the missing family. As we made our way along the narrow path, the forest grew darker and more oppressive. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out the sun. The air was thick with humidity, and the only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the undergrowth and the distant calls of birds. After several hours of hiking, we came across a small clearing. In the center was an old, dilapidated cabin, half hidden by vines and moss. It looked as if it hadn't been used in years. We approached cautiously, calling out for the family, but there was no response. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that filtered through the gaps in the walls. The furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust, and cobwebs hung from the corners. It was clear that no one had been there for a long time. Just as we were about to leave, one of my team members, Sarah, found Somathinga's small, weathered journal tucked away in a drawer. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing was still legible. It belonged to a previous ranger named James, who had patrolled the park decades ago. As we read through the journal, a chilling story began to unfold. James had written about strange occurrences in the park, unexplained disappearances, eerie noises at night, and sightings of shadowy figures. He mentioned a particular area, near Cedar Creek Falls, where the incidents seemed to be concentrated. According to his entries, anyone who ventured too close to the falls risked never returning. We decided to head toward Cedar Creek Falls, hoping it might provide some answers. The journey was arduous, the terrain becoming more rugged and difficult to navigate. As we neared the falls, the forest grew eerily silent. Even the birds had stopped singing, and the only sound was the distant roar of the water. When we finally reached the falls, we were struck by the sheer beauty of the place. The water cascaded down a series of rocky ledges, forming a crystal-clear pool at the base. But there was something off about the placey and unsettling feeling that prickled the back of my neck. We split up to search the area, and it wasn't long before Sarah found something disturbing. Near the edge of the pool, partially hidden by rocks, was a tattered backpack. It was covered in dirt and leaves, but inside we found identification belonging to the missing family. Our hearts sank as we realized they had indeed been here. As we continued to search, we found more items: a torn jacket, a broken flashlight, and a water bottle. Just as we were about to call off the search for the night, I heard a faint sound, a soft, rhythmic chanting, coming from deeper within the forest. I motioned for the team to follow, and we cautiously made our way toward the sound. The air around the cave was cold, and a sense of dread settled over us. We entered the cave, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Inside, the cave walls were covered in strange, ancient symbols. The chanting echoed off the stone, creating an eerie atmosphere. As we ventured deeper, we saw a flickering light ahead, a small fire burning in a makeshift altar. They were alive, but unresponsive, as if in a trance. We called out to them, but they didn't react. It was as if they were trapped in a nightmare. As we approached, the chanting grew louder and more intense. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, gaunt man, with wild eyes and long, unkempt hair. He wore tattered clothing and carried a staff adorned with bones and feathers. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to mask the fear in my voice. The man ignored me, continuing to chant in a language I didn't recognize. He raised his staff, and the fire flared up, casting grotesque shadows on the cave walls. I felt a powerful, malevolent force emanating from him. Realizing we were in danger, I signaled for my team to retreat. We backed out of the cave, never taking our eyes off the man. Once outside, we regrouped and decided to get the family out of there, no matter the cost. We re-entered the cave with determination, but the man was gone. The family was still in a trance, but we managed to rouse them enough to lead them out. As soon as they stepped into the daylight, the trance seemed to break. We quickly made our way back to the ranger station, leaving the eerie cave and its dark secrets behind. The family couldn't remember anything about their ordeal, only that they had been drawn to the falls, and then everything went blank. In the following days, we tried to piece together what had happened. But without more evidence, it was impossible to say for sure. The family recovered and eventually returned home, grateful to be alive. As for me, the experience left a lasting mark. I no longer scoffed at the stories of strange occurrences in the park. I had seen firsthand that Cedar Creek held secrets beyond our understanding. To this day, I still patrol the park, but I am always wary of Cedar Creek Falls and the cave. The memory of that haunting chanting and the figure with the staff haunts my dreams. Cedar Creek is a place of beauty, but also of mystery and danger. And I remain vigilant, knowing that there are forces in the forest that we may never fully understand. Hollow Pine Trail had always been one of the less traveled paths in Pinewood National Park. It was known for its dense forest and the eerie quiet that seemed to envelop anyone who dared to venture down it. As a park ranger, I had heard countless stories about the trail whispers of ghostly apparitions, strange lights, and sudden, unexplained chills. Most of these tales were dismissed as mere campfire stories. But deep down, I always had a nagging feeling that there was something more to them. My name is Emily, and I've been a park ranger at Pinewood for nearly 8 years. I love the solitude and the beauty of the park, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered around Hollow Pine Trail. Despite my reservations, my job required me to patrol all areas of the park, and that included the infamous trail. One crisp autumn morning, I received a report of a missing hiker. A young woman named Laura had been exploring Hollow Pine Trail and had failed to return the previous evening. Her friends were worried and had contacted the ranger station when she didn't show up at their designated meeting spot. I gathered my gear and set out immediately, knowing that time was of the essence. The trailhead was shrouded in mist, and the tall pines loomed overhead, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. The air was cool, and the forest was eerily silent. As I made my way down the trail, I kept my eyes and ears open for any signs of Laura. The ground was covered in fallen leaves, and the trail was narrow and winding, making it easy for someone to lose their way. I called out her name, hoping for a response, but the only answer was the rustling of leaves in the breeze. After about an hour of searching, I came across something unusual. A small, weathered journal lay half buried in the dirt. I picked it up and brushed off the leaves, opening it to the first page. The journal belonged to Laura, and it detailed her adventures in the park. The last entry was dated the day she went missing, and it mentioned her excitement about exploring Hollow Pine Trail. I continued down the trail, clutching the journal tightly. The further I went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees seemed to close in around me, and the silence was almost suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I rounded a bend, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood in the middle of the trail, partially obscured by the mist. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, her hair flowing around her like a dark halo. She stared at me with hollow, empty eyes, and then, as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished into the mist. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Had I just seen a ghost? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that what I had seen was real. Determined to find Laura, I pressed on, even as the trail grew darker and more foreboding. I reached a small clearing where the trees parted, revealing a dilapidated cabin. The structure looked like it had been abandoned for decades, its wooden walls covered in moss and ivy. I approached the cabin cautiously, calling out Laura's name. There was no response, but I felt a strange pull, as if something or someone was guiding me toward the cabin. The door creaked open with a loud groan, and I stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and the windows were covered in grime. In the center of the room, a figure lay huddled on the ground, shivering and muttering to herself. It was Laura. I rushed to her side and gently shook her shoulder. "Laura, it's Emily. I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help you." She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "The ghosts. They won't leave me alone," she whispered, her voice trembling. I helped her to her feet and guided her out of the cabin. As we made our way back down the trail, she told me about the strange things she had experienced. She had seen the same ghostly figure I had, and had heard whispers and footsteps following her through the forest. She had taken refuge in the cabin, hoping to escape whatever was haunting her, but the spirits had followed her inside. We finally reached the trailhead, and I radioed for assistance. Laura was taken to the hospital for evaluation, and I filed my report, detailing everything we had experienced. The other rangers were skeptical, but I knew what I had seen and heard. Over the following weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching and waiting. I returned to Hollow Pine Trail several times, hoping to find answers, but the trail remained silent and empty. The ghostly figure never appeared again, and the whispers in the forest faded into memory. But the story of the haunting of Hollow Pine Trail lived on, a reminder that some mysteries are never truly solved. And though I continued my work as a park ranger, I always approached the trail with a sense of caution, knowing that the spirits of the forest were never far away. I had always considered my job as a park ranger a dream come true. The endless days spent in nature, the feeling of being part of something greater, and the opportunity to help visitors appreciate the beauty of the wilderness were all aspects of the job that I cherished. However, one particular assignment changed my perception of the park forever. My name is Lucas, and I've been a park ranger at Cedar Ridge National Park for the past 10 years. The park was known for its diverse wildlife, stunning landscapes, and a certain area known as the Whispering Grove. The grove was a secluded part of the park, famous for its ancient, towering trees, and the eerie sounds that seemed to emanate from the forest itself. Most visitors avoided it, claiming it gave them an unsettling feeling, but some thrill-seekers ventured in, looking for a scare. One summer evening, I received a distress call from a group of college students who had gone camping near the Whispering Grove. They sounded frantic, claiming that one of their friends, Megan, had disappeared after wandering into the forest alone. Despite the setting sun, I knew I had to act quickly. I grabbed my gear and set out for the grove. As I approached the trail leading to the Whispering Grove, the air grew cooler, and an inexplicable sense of foreboding washed over me. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I turned on my flashlight and plunged into the dense undergrowth. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I called out Megan's name, but the only response was the rustling of leaves and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. After about half an hour of searching, I came across a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large, ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches stretching out like a giant's arms. At the base of the tree, I found Megan. She was sitting on the ground, her back against the trunk, staring blankly into the distance. "Megan," I called out as I approached her. She didn't respond. I knelt beside her and gently shook her shoulder. "Megan, it's Lucas. I'm a park ranger. Your friends are worried about you." She turned to look at me, her eyes wide with fear. "The whispers. They won't stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. I glanced around the clearing, but there was no one else in sight. "What whispers? Did you see anyone else out here?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, it's the trees. They're whispering to me. They're angry." I tried to reassure her, though I felt a chill run down my spine. "It's probably just the wind, Megan. Let's get you back to your friends." As I helped her to her feet, a cold breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible murmur. It sounded like whispers, just as Megan had described. I felt a shiver of unease, but pushed it aside, focusing on getting Megan out of the forest. The journey back to the campsite was unnerving. The whispers seemed to follow us, growing louder and more insistent with each step. Megan clung to my arm, her fear palpable. I tried to keep my own anxiety in check, but the atmosphere was becoming increasingly oppressive. Finally, we reached the edge of the Whispering Grove, and the whispers abruptly ceased. Megan's friends rushed to her side, relieved to see her safe. I watched as they embraced her, grateful that the ordeal was over. But the unease lingered, a dark cloud hanging over the evening. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss in the Whispering Grove. The whispers haunted my thoughts, and I found myself drawn back to the forest, determined to uncover the truth. I spoke with some of the older rangers, hoping they might have some insight. One of the senior rangers, an old-timer named Hank, shared a chilling story. He told me that the Whispering Grove was once the site of a Native American burial ground. The spirits of those buried there were said to guard the forest, protecting it from those who would do it harm. Over the years, there had been numerous reports of strange occurrences and ghostly whispers, all attributed to the restless spirits. Hank's story only fueled my curiosity. I decided to return to the grove, this time prepared for whatever I might encounter. I packed a small bag with supplies and set out at dawn, determined to uncover the source of the whispers. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the familiar sense of unease settled over me. The whispers began almost immediately, faint at first, but growing louder with each step. I pressed on, following the sound, hoping it would lead me to some answers. Hours passed, and the whispers became almost deafening. I reached the clearing once more, standing before the ancient oak tree. The air was thick with tension, and the whispers seemed to swirl around me, a cacophony of voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I placed my hand on the tree's rough bark, hoping to connect with whatever spirits resided there. As I did, a sudden, overwhelming sense of sorrow washed over me. The whispers grew louder, and I could almost make out words, fragments of stories, pleas for peace, and warnings of danger. It became clear to me that the spirits were not malevolent. They were guardians of the forest, disturbed by those who entered their sacred ground without respect. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent apology, promising to honor their presence and protect the forest they cherished. Slowly, the whispers began to fade, replaced by a profound silence. I felt a sense of peace settle over the clearing, and I knew that the spirits had accepted my apology. I made my way back to the trailhead, the oppressive atmosphere lifting with each step. From that day forward, I made it my mission to educate visitors about the history and significance of the Whispering Grove. I shared the story of the spirits who protected the forest, urging people to respect the land and its guardians. The park remained a place of beauty and wonder, but with a newfound reverence for the ancient spirits that watched over it. The haunting of the Whispering Grove was a reminder that nature is not just a collection of trees and wildlife, but a living, breathing entity, with a history and spirit all its own. And as a park ranger, it was my duty to protect and honor that spirit, ensuring that the forest remained a sanctuary for generations to come. We split up, each of us taking a different section of the building. I went to the room where I had found Tom's journal, hoping to find more clues. The whispering grew louder, and I could feel the presence of something unseen. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a cold breeze brush past me. Suddenly, one of my colleagues, Jake, called out. He had found something, a hidden compartment in the floorboards. We gathered around as he pried it open, revealing a dusty box. Inside were more journals, old photographs, and a small, tarnished locket. The photographs showed Tom and his fellow rangers, smiling and posing in front of the station. But one photo stood out, a blurry image of a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest. The same figure Tom had described in his journal. As we examined the locket, the whispering intensified. It was as if the spirits were trying to communicate with us. I opened the locket, revealing a faded photograph of a woman. Tom's wife, perhaps. A note inside read, "To my beloved Tom. May you always find your way home." We decided to leave the station, taking the box with us. As we stepped outside, the whispering ceased, replaced by a profound silence. We made our way back to the main ranger station, feeling a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. Over the next few days, we carefully examined the contents of the box. The additional journals provided more insights into Tom's life and the strange occurrences at the station. It became clear that Tom had been tormented by the same presence that haunted the station, driven to the brink of madness. Working as a park ranger at Pine Ridge National Park was more than just a job for me, it was a calling. I relished the opportunity to spend my days amidst the towering pines, tranquil lakes, and sprawling meadows. The park was a haven for hikers, campers, and nature enthusiasts, but it also held secrets that few dared to uncover. My name is Sophie, and I've been a park ranger at Pine Ridge for 7 years. The park was known for its breathtaking scenery and diverse wildlife. But there was one area that had always intrigued me, the old, abandoned ranger station deep within the forest. It was a relic from the early days of the park, left to decay as the new, modern facilities took its place. Locals whispered that the station was haunted, but I had always dismissed it as mere superstition. One crisp autumn afternoon, I decided to explore the old ranger station. The air was cool, and the leaves crunched underfoot as I made my way through the dense forest. The station was hidden deep within the woods, far from the well-trodden trails. As I approached, the structure loomed before me, a dilapidated shell of its former self. The wooden building was weathered and overgrown with ivy. The windows were shattered, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. I hesitated for a moment, feeling a strange sense of unease, but curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, filled with the scent of decay and mold. Broken furniture and scattered papers littered the floor. I shone my flashlight around, revealing faded photographs and old maps pinned to the walls. The station had clearly been abandoned in a hurry. As I moved deeper into the building, I heard a faint sound like the whispering of the wind. I paused, listening intently, but the sound ceased. I continued my exploration, examining the remnants of the station's past. In one corner, I found a journal, its pages yellowed with age. I opened it, intrigued by the scribbled entries. The journal belonged to a ranger named Tom, who had worked at Pine Ridge in the 1950s. His entries detailed his daily duties, but as I read further, the tone shifted. Tom began to describe strange occurrences at the station, unexplained noises, objects moving on their own, and eerie figures glimpsed in the shadows. He wrote of a presence that seemed to haunt the station, growing more malevolent with each passing day. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read Tom's final entry. He wrote of a shadowy figure that appeared each night, watching him from the edge of the forest. The figure grew bolder, coming closer until it was right outside the station. Tom's last words were a desperate plea for help, scribbled in haste. Suddenly, heard the whispering again, louder this time. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There was no one there, but the whispering continued, echoing through the empty station. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed towards the door, feeling an overwhelming urge to flee. As I reached the doorway, the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening, and I could feel eyes on me, watching my every move. I stepped outside, the cold air hitting me like a slap. I hurried away from the station, not daring to look back. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Tom's journal and the strange occurrences at the station haunted my thoughts. I decided to do some research, hoping to find more information about Tom and the history of the station. I remember the day like it was yesterday, even though it happened over a decade ago. The sun was setting behind the rugged mountains, casting long shadows over the forest as I made my rounds. As a park ranger at Clearwater National Park, my duties included ensuring the safety of the visitors and preserving the natural beauty of the park. But that day, my usual routine was shattered by a radio call that sent chills down my spine. "Ranger Emily, we've got a report of missing campers at Pine Hollow," crackled the voice of my supervisor, Dan. "Can you head over there and check it out?" Pine Hollow was notorious among the rangers. Nestled deep within the forest, it was a remote and rarely visited area, known for its eerie atmosphere and the unsettling stories that surrounded it. Despite my trepidation, I grabbed my gear and set out on the winding trail that led to Pine Hollow. The air grew colder and the forest denser as I approached the hollow. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches intertwining to form a natural canopy that blocked out the fading sunlight. I switched on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the encroaching darkness. As I neared the campsite, I noticed something was off. The usual sounds of the forest chirping birds, rustling leaves, and distant animal calls were conspicuously absent. An unnatural silence hung in the air, amplifying the sound of my footsteps on the forest floor. The campsite itself was a scene of disarray. Tents were collapsed, camping gear strewn about, and a smoldering campfire cast an eerie glow over the area. But what struck me most was the absence of any campers. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I called out, hoping for a response. "Hello, is anyone here?" My voice echoed through the trees, but there was no reply. I radioed Dan to report my findings, and he promised to send backup. As I waited, I decided to investigate further. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I found a journal near one of the tents, its pages filled with handwritten notes. It belonged to a young man named Alex, who had been camping with his friends. The last entry was particularly unsettling. It described strange noises in the night, whispers, footsteps, and shadowy figures moving just beyond the firelight. Alex wrote that they felt like they were being watched. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read the final lines. Something's out there. It's not human. We need to leave, but we're too scared to move. If anyone finds this, please help us. The silence was broken by a rustling sound behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam illuminating the underbrush. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure dart between the trees, but it disappeared before I could get a good look. My heart pounded as I realized I might not be alone. The wait for backup felt like an eternity. I kept my flashlight trained on the surrounding forest, every shadow and movement setting my nerves on edge. Finally, Dan and 2 other rangers arrived, their presence providing a much-needed sense of relief. We conducted a thorough search of the area, but there was no sign of Alex or his friends. It was as if they had simply vanished. The only clues were the scattered belongings and Alex's ominous journal. We decided to spend the night at the campsite, hoping the missing campers might return or that we might find some answers. As darkness fell, we gathered around the campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the trees. We took turns keeping watch, the oppressive silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Despite our exhaustion, none of us could sleep. The sense of unease was palpable. In the early hours of the morning, I heard a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. I strained to listen, trying to make out the words. It sounded like multiple voices, overlapping and blending together, their tones mournful and pleading. I nudged Dan awake and motioned for him to listen. He heard it too. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, his face pale. We followed the sound, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The whispers grew louder, guiding us deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the air grew colder with each step. We finally reached a small clearing, and the whispers stopped abruptly. In the center of the clearing was an old, weathered cabin, its windows shattered and its roof partially caved in. It looked like it hadn't been inhabited in decades. We approached cautiously, our flashlights revealing more unsettling details: deep scratches on the door, strange symbols carved into the wood, and a feeling of malevolence that seemed to emanate from the structure. We forced the door open and stepped inside. The interior was a mess of broken furniture, rotting wood, and more strange symbols. In the center of the room was a trapdoor, partially hidden by debris. With a sense of dread, we cleared the area and lifted the trapdoor, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the earth. "Do we really want to go down there?" one of the rangers, Mark, asked, his voice trembling. "We have to find out what happened," Dan replied, though his face betrayed his fear. We descended the stairs, our flashlights barely penetrating the darkness. The air grew colder and more stifling the deeper we went. At the bottom, we found a small, subterranean room lined with stone walls. In the center was a large, stone slab, and around it were more of the strange symbols, painted in what looked like dried blood. But what caught our attention most was the group of people huddled in the corner: Alex and his friends. They were alive, but clearly traumatized, their eyes wide with fear. They told us that they had been drawn to the cabin by the same whispers we had heard. Once inside, they had been trapped, unable to find their way out as the whispers tormented them. We quickly escorted them back to the surface and radioed for medical assistance. As dawn broke, the forest began to feel less oppressive, the shadows retreating with the rising sun. Alex and his friends were taken to the nearest hospital, where they slowly began to recover from their ordeal. In the days that followed, we investigated the cabin and its sinister symbols. We learned that it had once belonged to a reclusive hermit who was rumored to dabble in dark rituals. The locals believed he had summoned malevolent spirits that continued to haunt the area long after his death. The cabin was sealed off, and we made sure to warn visitors to stay away from Pine Hollow. The park returned to its usual tranquility, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits of the lost campers still lingered, their whispers echoing through the forest. Working at Clearwater National Park, I've learned to respect the unknown and the unseen. The forest holds many secrets, and not all of them are meant to be uncovered. The experience at Pine Hollow was a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left undisturbed. Their echoes a haunting reminder of those who have been lost to the darkness. Clearwater National Park had always been a place of beauty and wonder, but within its boundaries lay a dark secreta place known as Blackwood Grove. The grove was avoided by most visitors and rangers alike due to the eerie atmosphere that seemed to cling to it like a shroud. As a seasoned park ranger, I had heard all the stories about the grove, but had never paid them much mind until that fateful autumn day. It started with a missing hiker. Jenna Thompson, a seasoned adventurer, had gone off trail and hadn't returned by nightfall. Her family reported her missing, and the search began. I was assigned to lead the team into Blackwood Grove, the last known location of Jenna, according to a frantic call she had made to her brother. "Please, hurry, there's something out here." Her voice had trembled over the phone before the line went dead. We set out early in the morning, the air crisp and cool. The sun barely penetrated the thick canopy of ancient, gnarled trees as we entered the grove. The deeper we ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The forest was unnaturally silent, and an unsettling feeling gnawed at my gut. The first sign of trouble came when we found Jenna's backpack, discarded near an old, decrepit cabin. The cabin was a relic from the 1800s, abandoned for reasons lost to time. Its weathered wood and broken windows gave it a haunted look. As we approached, I felt a cold breeze brush past me, though the air had been still just moments before. "Looks like she might have gone inside," suggested Ethan, one of the younger rangers. His voice was steady, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We cautiously entered the cabin, our flashlights sweeping over the decaying interior. Cobwebs hung in every corner, and the floor creaked ominously under our boots. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, etched into the wood with what appeared to be a knife. They were symbols I didn't recognize, but they radiated a sense of foreboding. "Jenna?" I called out, my voice echoing eerily in the confined space. There was no response. As we explored further, we found a journal on a rickety old table. It belonged to a man named Elias Blackwood, a settler who had lived in the cabin centuries ago. His entries grew more erratic as the pages went on, detailing his descent into madness. He wrote of dark forces in the grove, of voices that whispered to him in the night, and of a curse that had befallen him and his family. "I don't like this," Ethan muttered, his flashlight beam trembling slightly. "We need to find Jenna and get out of here." We continued our search, eventually finding a trapdoor hidden beneath a dusty rug. The hinges squealed as we opened it, revealing a set of stone steps descending into darkness. A foul, musty odor wafted up from below, making us gag. "She's got to be down," I said, steeling myself. "Let's go." We descended into the darkness, our flashlights barely piercing the inky blackness. The walls were damp and covered in mold, and the air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a small chamber, its walls covered in the same strange symbols we had seen in the cabin. In the center of the room lay Jenna, unconscious but alive. Her skin was pale, and her breathing shallow. We rushed to her side, checking for injuries. As I lifted her into my arms, I heard whispers that Elias Blackwood had written about. They were faint but unmistakable, a chorus of voices murmuring in an ancient, forgotten language. "We need to go now," I said urgently. We hurried back up the stairs and out of the cabin, the whispers growing louder and more insistent with each step. It felt as if the very forest was watching us, urging us to leave. By the time we reached the edge of Blackwood Grove, Jenna stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Thank you," she whispered weakly. "It was trying to take me." We got her to safety and medical attention, where she slowly recovered from her ordeal. She recounted her experience in the grove, how she had felt compelled to enter the cabin, driven by a force she couldn't understand. The whispers had lured her down into the chamber, where she had fallen unconscious. The symbols, she said, were part of an ancient ritual meant to trap restless spirits. Elias Blackwood had tried to protect himself from the curse that haunted his family. But in doing so, he had only strengthened its hold on the grove. Jenna's encounter had been a near miss, but the grove's dark presence remained. In the weeks that followed, we cordoned off Blackwood Grove, warning visitors to stay away. The stories and legends of the grove persisted, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked within Clearwater National Park. Working as a park ranger, I've seen many strange and inexplicable things, but Blackwood Grove remains the most haunting. The whispers of the lost souls echo in my mind, a constant reminder that some places are best left undisturbed, their secrets buried in the shadows of the past.